I live in very rural western Pennsylvania. One night after a party, I was driving my buddy Dan home through the middle of nowhere. I was stone sober and hadn't had a single drink. The road we were on to go to his house literally had grass growing down the center. I still remember the sentence I was saying when we saw it. I was talking about wanting to mail a box of bees to a dude I had beef over a girl with. Just a dumb, stupid driving conversation, but the moment made it stick with me. We were laughing at what I said, and this thing took a step and then leapt over the road in front of us. I will never forget it turning its head and look at my car as it bounded across the road. I wasn't even sure it had happened and didn't say anything until I noticed Dan had stopped laughing too. "Did you see that?" The best I can describe it was incredibly tall, 7 or 8 feet. It had to have been bean-poled skinny, was dark grey and smooth and had no features, no eyes, mouth or anything. Just a body. Just a grey human-like figure. My headlights fully lit it up and there was nothing but a form to it. I remember it looking smooth, but my headlights didn't shine off it. It was all over in a flash, but I can still see it in my head. Dan refused to get out of the car when we got to his house. We just sort of sat there in disbelief, describing what we saw. Had he not been there and seen it for himself, I would have assumed it was my mind playing tricks on me. It was just so jarring that it has never left my mind. I think about it often, and don't really believe in anything paranormal, but whatever I saw that night, something wasn't right. This happened at a campsite local to me when I was around 12. We used to visit this campsite every year at school. It was halfway up a mountainside, and there were little huts and cabins dotted along the shore of the lake below. Our students were in the cabin, in 2 large ones that would sleep about 50, then 10 that would sleep about 6, and other smaller ones. And as usual, as you might imagine, there was gossip and rumours about the camp. There was a rumour that at the start of spring, a woman had taken her own life in one of the smaller cabins. Apparently she died of a broken heart or a severed neck. Ever since, she has been said to haunt the cabins and local area. Our group decided to stay in a 5-person cabin to be brave. While we were eating dinner, us kids decided to do some dares. So we went back to our cabin and we stayed up late chatting and talking about the girls we liked in our bunk beds. One of the older kids came back and he was hiding something under his shirt. When he pulled it out, we saw that it was a register of all the students. He read out all the girls' names by torchlight, and we had to confess which one of them we liked. We made sure that the lights from our torches were not seen outside so we wouldn't get found out. When talking about the girls we liked reached its natural conclusion, the topic of discussion changed to dates. "I'm not scared of anything," one of my friends called Mako boasted. "Yeah, me either. Let's do a lap around the lake then," I chimed in. I was feeling brave, I guess. We began by telling ghost stories as an initial dare. We then dared someone to leave the room, and now the atmosphere was getting heavy. We were all starting to get a bit frightened, even though none of us could admit to it. We then dared each other to run to the other huts and come back, etc. Everyone said there was nothing out there. "Alright then, run halfway around the lake." One of my other friends groaned. Yeah, but the caretaker will probably find us." "Oh, if you say we're going to the bathroom, no one will notice." There were several toilets jotted around the premises, so it would be a convincing lie. And we set off, half nervous and half thrilled. The surroundings were completely dark, with not a single light. The lake was shrouded in a thin, eerie mist. We walked on, relying on the mini flashlights, almost tripping over the tree roots. Eventually, once the toilets came into view, there were no more excuses. We had to go around the lake. We carried on walking, and after a while one of my friends tapped me on the shoulder. I looked at him, and he was pointing over towards the lake, so I slowly twisted my head to see what he was looking at. And there, in the water, was a woman with long black hair standing on it, not in it, on it. There wasn't even a ripple around her body. I couldn't make out her expression for the distance, but I felt like she was looking at me somehow. We stood in a line, motionless, staring at this impossible woman. I wanted to move, but my body was completely frozen in fear. And then suddenly, without missing a beat, the woman came running towards us, her hair disheveled and her arms and legs moving wildly. The distance between us quickly closed, and I could make out her expression. Her eyes were wide, and their tongue was hanging out of their wide-open mouth. They looked like a junkie who had just come to. My brain was working on overdrive, telling me that these were going to be my last few seconds of being alive. And in that very same moment, I hear someone shout from behind me, and the light of a torch shone upon us. There was the old man, the caretaker. "What the hell are you guys doing?" The toilet." We made an excuse, and then I burst out, The woman was there." The caretaker didn't seem particularly concerned when he heard that, and made no visible reply. "Have you finished using it? Hurry back if you have." And then he chased us back to the huts. I crawled into bed in silence, but couldn't sleep well. Maybe everyone else felt the same. The next morning, while we were brushing our teeth, I spoke to Mako about the woman, as he was the one who informed me of her. But we couldn't quite agree on anything. He said it didn't look like a woman. He said they just appeared to be floating heads. I don't think I'll ever get the true conclusion from that story, but it left me with a chilling fear of that campsite, and I'm not particularly inclined to go again in future. I have a story that happened to my uncle. He used to tell this story when we went camping, and it scared the lights out of me every time I heard it. We live in Utah, and my uncle Mark went on a mission at 19. They sent him to the Indian reservation in Arizona, and they paired him up with a companion called Carl. When they first got there, there was a huge rift with the locals on the reservation with them being there. They didn't want my uncle and Carl staying on reservation grounds. Eventually, they came to a compromise that they would stay on the outskirts in a trailer. This reservation wasn't very big and was located next to a heavily wooded area. The first night they were trying to sleep when all of a sudden their trailer started to shake violently back and forth. Startled and unsure what was happening, they climbed under the table for cover. Mark could distinctly hear someone pushing it from both sides of the trailer, like a group of people, and after about 5 minutes, it stopped. That next day they made rounds on the reservation and were talking to the locals. Carl made a comment to one of the families that their trailer was shaking the night before. The families got very quiet and told them they had to leave. They thought it was strange but tried to not think of it. The next night it happened again. They awoke to their trailer shaking back and forth, and again climbed under the table until it stopped. This went on for 2 more nights, and any time they tried to talk to anyone about it, they got quiet and told them to leave. Mark started thinking that due to the tension of their arrival, the locals were doing this to scare them away. They then go into a convenience store, and they were talking about how frustrated they were with the situation. The clerk overheard and said that they can't talk about it. It's forbidden. Confused, they asked him, "Can't talk about what?" And the guy continued to tell them about skinwalkers. He says that they are evil demons that were once Native American witches. If they talk about it, they will come for their souls. They just walked out of there baffled. They thought it was another scare tactic. So that night when the shaking started again, my uncle decided to be brave and confront them. He went to the trailer door, threw it open and yelled, "Hey!" But when he did that, he saw these 3 animals run off. 2 appeared to be wolves, and 1 was as large as a bear, but they looked strange, with almost human features, and he watched them run towards the trees. All 3 of them did so standing on 2 legs, and walked slowly towards the trees, making a human cackling laugh. It scared him so badly that they called their mission president the next morning and asked to be moved. They were relocated that day, and for a year nothing happened. One day they announced that Carl was being relocated to another city, and Mark was getting a new companion, Jimmy. They had to drive for about an hour to pick Jimmy up from the airport. The road they traveled went through the boundaries of the reservation. They arrived at around 8 p.m. and met Jimmy and went to leave. The mission president told Jimmy that while they were driving through the area it might be dangerous, so to not make any stops, and that if he needed to use the restroom, to go now. Jimmy replies saying he was fine. The mission president gets serious enough to even freak out Mark, and with that they hit the road. As they were around half hour into the drive, they were going through the area of the reservation boundaries, and Jimmy starts complaining that he needs to pee, badly. The mission president insists that they couldn't stop here and that he will need to hold it. Jimmy insistent he can't hold it, so the mission president reluctantly stops the car and impresses upon him the seriousness of being quick. With a look of confusion, Jimmy just says, "Alright," opens the door and starts peeing. About 5 seconds later, the mission president says nothing and just yanks Jimmy into the car and floors it. Jimmy and Mark start freaking out and ask what's going on, but the mission president says nothing and just increases his speed. That's when all of a sudden Mark sees something next to the car on his right. A giant wolf-looking man was running on 2 feet next to the car. Mark looked at the speedometer. They were going over 60 miles an hour and still increasing. The wolf creature kept right next to the car for 10 minutes until they finally took off into the trees. Shaking, Jimmy gets out of the car when they arrive. They didn't speak through the whole ordeal and says, "What did I just see?" The mission president just says, "Next time I tell you to take care of your business, you take care of your business." This happened roughly 30 years ago, and it's something that I've only told a few select people about until now. It happened one night when me and my girlfriend at the time drove to the beach. After work I went to pick her up and we headed straight there. However, when we arrived, the beach was already pitch dark. I mean, we should have known better not to go so late, but for some reason we both really wanted to go that night after work, and it was roughly 10 p.m. by the time we left the car. We were talking in the car eating our McDonald's. We had stopped on the way to look out into the darkness. At least we could see the waves rolling against the beach. That was worth the drive, I suppose. I told my girlfriend that I couldn't stay too long because I had work early in the morning, but she didn't respond. I thought that she might have been annoyed at me for saying I had to leave so soon. I looked over at her and noticed that she seemed to be transfixed on something at sea. "What is it?" I asked her. She didn't answer, so I looked in the direction she was looking and saw a strong beam of light swaying across the waves far from the shoreline. "Is that a squid fishing boat or something?" I said to her. "That's not a squid fishing boat, the light's not right. You don't think it's getting closer, do you?" I looked out at sea and agreed the bright light was definitely approaching. It was shaking as it moved along the waves, and it appeared to be heading right for the shore. Maybe it's a fireball. Fireballs, a will-o-wisp-like paranormal phenomena in Japan, visually a little orb-like thing. The balls of fire appear at night and are said to be the souls of those who've been separated from their earthbound bodies. If it was a fireball, then it wouldn't shine so brightly now. Surely that's a UFO. She said it excitedly. I was kind of taken aback. I didn't know until that point that she had an interest in the paranormal or the occult. I looked at the mysterious light a little closer, and she was right. It wasn't a flickering kind of dim light that you might expect to see when you think of a fireball. It was a strong, bright searchlight shining down at the waves. I heard myself absent-mindedly agreeing with her by saying, "Yeah, guess it could be a UFO." At that point, it was only about 200 to 300 meters away from us. That might sound a little strange, so let me just say the beach that we drove to was a very secluded one. The shore wasn't that far away from where you would park. We liked the beach because there was never anyone around at night, and there wasn't much light in the area. It was perfect for a nice secluded evening date. As the light of what we thought was a UFO approached, I noted that I wasn't scared. I just thought to myself, wow, this could be a UFO. It's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of deal. My girlfriend then said, "Hey, isn't the light getting to the shoreline now?" It sure was. I snapped out of the state of awe and began to panic. I saw the light go over the waves at the shore and knew it was about to illuminate the sand on the beach next. The gravity of the situation set in for me. "Put your seatbelt on, we gotta get out of here." I started the ignition and pulled a U-turn and drove out of the beach at breakneck speed. As I drove, my girlfriend continued to stare at the light. I heard her call out in a frightened voice, "The light's right on where we were parked." I was really panicking and I was driving for our lives. I felt like a rally driver at one point and drifted out onto the sand. Finally, we made it back onto the road, which was well lit, and the sense of security we lost down by the shore slowly returned to us. I pulled over and I remember I had goosebumps all over my arms, and when I took my hands off the steering wheel, I noticed that they were drenched in sweat. We spent the rest of the journey in a hushed silence. I think neither of us knew what to say to comfort the other. If she was anything like me, she was replaying it over and over in her head. That weird overhead light advancing on us was coming straight for us. I dropped her off at her place, and when I got back to mine, I just laid down on my bed. I was there wondering if what had happened truly happened or if it was some kind of dream. I met my girlfriend the following day and asked her outright, "That wasn't a dream, wasn't it?" "Of course not. I was there with you," she replied. She seemed a little skeptical that day. I don't know how to describe it. "I do wonder what that was," she would ask rhetorically. Last night she had been so sure it was a UFO, but now she was questioning herself, it seemed. Of course, I didn't know what it was myself, so I didn't have an answer for her. Well, that's where it sort of ended, I guess. One thing I can tell you is I ended up marrying that girlfriend, and 20 years on from that night at the beach, the memory of that strange bright overhead searchlight has faded away. But one evening we watched a TV show about Japanese national abduction cases. For those unaware, there are a large number of missing person cases which are tied to North Korea. About 470 people have been abducted according to the Japanese government as of November 2021, and abduction cannot be ruled out for a further 873 individuals. And during this TV show they showed a map which had all the locations where they believed that the abductees were captured and kidnapped. What did we see on that map? Well, none other than the secluded beach we drove to that night 20-something years ago. I looked at my wife and she was staring stunned at the TV. We didn't encounter a UFO that night. We likely encountered a North Korean ship coming to shore. They could have easily seen us pull in and park up. I felt a chill race down my spine when I realized that we could have ended up as victims if I didn't drive off when I did, and could have easily have been taken. Since that day, whenever North Korea appears on the news, I think to myself how lucky I am to live the peaceful life I now have with my wife. The realization that it wasn't a UFO, but people with evil intentions, was hands down the scariest moment of my life. I was 9 when this happened. My sister, my dad, my stepmom and I were at a place called Palmetto Island. It was a camping resort where you just pull up with a tent or camper and stay there for a weekend or so. We were in a camper. I should set the scene for you though. Palmetto Island wasn't really an island in the traditional sense. It was completely surrounded by palm trees and vegetation, except for the road in and out. There were roads in the resort, but they were only for golf carts and other small vehicles. The whole place was also dense with palm trees and vegetation. If you weren't on the road, in a campsite, or at one of the recreational areas, you would be in a forest. We, as in my family, were all hanging out at one of the playgrounds. I had made a new friend who I was playing with. At some point, the rest of my family had left me to play with my new friend, until eventually he left too. I was there alone, and the sun began to set. This wasn't the first time we'd been to Palmetto Island, and I had at the time known it pretty well. I had assumed that the walk back to our campground would be short. However, at some point, I got turned around and ended up in the area where you would launch boats into the water to go fishing. There was a group of people there, and I asked them for directions. Now, I wasn't completely brain dead, so I lied and said the number of our campsite was 10 sites down from our actual one. They pointed me in the right direction, and I began to walk. Now, I hadn't known this at the time, but my family had realized I was no longer at the playground and started driving around in our golf cart and another one they had rented. If they hadn't, I probably wouldn't be telling this story. As I'm walking towards our campsite, a car pulls up beside me, and one of the people I had asked for directions rolls down the window. Keep in mind I had been walking for about an hour or two in total. He offers me a ride and tells me to ride in the front seat. Me, tired and weary from walking, accepts and gets into the car. I now know that this is something you should never do. We're driving in the right direction until he passes up the entrance to the campsites, at which point I knew something was wrong. I tell him he passed it up, but he doesn't reply. By some stroke of divine luck, I see my dad in a golf cart driving in the opposite direction at us, and I start yelling and waving at him. He pulls up in front of the car and stops, and so does the guy driving. I use the manual unlock in the car door and run to my dad, who has his concealed carry drawn on the guy as soon as I'm out of the way. He calls the police and holds the guy at gunpoint until they get there and arrest him. I'm only telling this story now because I found out last week that the guy and his whole family had done this before, and they had gotten away with it. I try not to think about what would have happened to me had my dad not showed up when he did. I am of Native American heritage from Akimisi Island, Canada, which is part of the territory of Nunavut, and the tickle monster is still seen to this day. This particular incident happened to my teacher's aunt. She told me this story in the 8th grade and explained that her aunties, who were about 6 to 8 years old at the time, were known troublemakers who wouldn't listen. Despite their mischievous nature, there was a blizzard storm and they wanted to play outside. However, their grandmother warned them to not go out on blizzard days. But despite the warning, my teacher's aunties thought themselves tough little ladies and decided they could venture into the bush during the blizzard whenever they pleased. Out of firewood, they planned to go gather some, but their older cousins intervened, instructing them to wait while she fetched firewood for them. As the older cousin ventured out, suddenly her screams echoed through the storm. She was screaming and crying, prompting her uncles to rush out with their firearms, firing in the direction of her cries. When the screams ceased, they went to find her, discovering her shaken up and sobbing quietly. Bringing her back into the tent, they inquired, "What happened? What happened to you?" Still shaken, she recounted seeing a creature with half a body, no eyes and wings. The creature seemed to consist of only bone without any meat or flesh. It was tickling her, explaining her screams and cries that seemed like a combination of laughter and distress. So the next time you venture out alone into a blizzard up north, beware of the tickle monster. This happened when I went camping with my friend. The weather forecast told us that we were in for some delightful sunny weather, but when we got to the campsite we could already see clouds forming by the evening. Eventually we felt drops of rain, and before long we were hiding from some very heavy rainfall. It was honestly terrible. We pitched our tent near a river, and the sound that the rain was making was so loud against the roof of the tent that we had to get out of it and take shelter in a nearby tunnel. The tunnel looked like it was disused, or at least not too busy with traffic, so we thought that we would be fine to take shelter in there for a while. It felt like a total washout, if you pardon the pun. I regretted coming. My friend and I weren't even talking, and usually we are unstoppably loud and chatty girls whenever we get together, but the rain had really dampened our spirits. I didn't want to be there, and I know that my friend was probably feeling the same. It was now dark out, and thunder was beginning to rumble around us when all of a sudden my friend piped up and said that she could sense someone nearby. You know the feeling. We looked into the darkness of the tunnel but couldn't see anyone. My friend said she was the type to jump at her own shadow, and that she has a real nervous streak in her, and she's super sensitive to the slightest noise or disturbance. I tried to calm her down, but she kept saying that she could hear or sense something, even though we were very clearly the only people in the disused tunnel. She said she heard voices, footsteps, and all sorts of things. I was there too, but I couldn't hear anything. I was getting irritated that the camping trip turned out to be such a massive failure, and very annoyed that she wouldn't stop going on about hearing and sensing things. I don't like thinking of stuff like ghosts or creepy people out in the woods or something like that, so I try my best to avoid conversations like it. I really didn't want to get scared. I tried to steer her away from freaking me out, but it didn't work. We ended up having a full-on argument out there in the rain. We didn't speak for a while, and this was even worse because there was a whole lot of night left, and we were now in silence. Plus, it was getting darker and darker, and my anxiety was building. I kept thinking, what if there is something or someone out there with us? We were standing with our backs to one another, at either wall of the tunnel, giving one another the space we needed to cool off. I couldn't take the silence anymore, so I said to my friend, without turning to face her, "I'm cold. Are you?" She replied in a very meek whisper like, "Yes." I could tell by the lack of strength in her voice that she was likely still riled up and a bit scared. Our relationship kind of worked like this. I was the calm friend whose role it was to make the peace and keep everything peaceful. I thought that it was probably time to assume that role. I started talking about other fun trips we'd been on, to push away from those frightening thoughts we were both having. I mentioned the time we went mountain hiking together, and how we both liked the same boy at the time at high school, and how embarrassing that was. I realized that my anxiety had disappeared, and I even felt a bit warmer now. I was really annoyed about the way the rain had ruined this trip for us, but we had both really been looking forward to going camping together, and I realized that I must not let my frustrations about the situation get the better of me, and I felt sorry about the way I had gotten so annoyed with her. "Listen, sorry about earlier. I flew off the handle there, and I shouldn't have taken it out on you. I was just scared and annoyed by the rain. I waited for a reply that never came. I apologized again, and again, but I got nothing back. I guess she was still annoyed at me. I turned my thoughts to something else, and that's when I quickly realized something. When we ran for shelter, I don't remember which way we came. Was it left or right? How do we get back to the campsite in the pitch darkness? I hope that she remembered, or we would have a fun walk in the rain to look forward to. I had to ask her, and she had to reply. "Hey, was there a fork in the road before the tunnel? Which way to go if we want to get back to the campsite? Was it left or right?" I heard a small voice respond, left. I thought, whoa, you have a great memory. And I used this opportunity to look over at her and noticed that she had her headphones on. She was listening to music. I tapped her shoulder and she gave me a dissatisfied look as she removed her headphones. What? How did you know that we have to take a left on the way back? She then said she didn't know what I was talking about. She said she didn't even hear me ask about how to get back, let alone answer me. I was wondering if she was joking, but the more I pushed for her response, the more she doubled down on stating that she didn't know what I was talking about. Could this be true? When I thought about it, I felt a rush of blood rise to my head. It was terrifying. Someone other than my friend had just responded to my questions. Not only that, but they had answered my earlier question about being cold as well. Was there someone in the tunnel with us? I turned around slowly and aimed the flashlight from my phone into the darkness of the tunnel. I couldn't see the end of it, but I was relatively sure that there wasn't anyone there. I don't know who the voice belonged to, but whoever it was right. We turned left and went back to camp. Who the hell was down there with us? It really scared me and I demanded that we left the camp. There was no way I would be able to sleep if there was someone out there with us in the dark on a night with heavy rain. I was driving from Atlanta, Georgia to Lexington, South Carolina with my girlfriend to visit parents. I like to drive at night, since there are less people on the road and I can take my time. At around 3 a.m. or so, we're making good time. I had stopped at a gas station and picked up some coffee for us, and we were due in about an hour. My girlfriend was sleeping soundly, and I'm listening to a quiet radio humming away. I start getting a little drowsy and take a sip. The road had no cars in sight except for a few spotted on the side of the road here and there. In the distance I can make out what looks like a hitchhiker, or what I think is one, but I can't really tell due to such low light. As I get closer, I start to notice other things, like how the person is kinda thin and tall, and completely, for the most part, apparently brown. I'm right on this thing now, and about 20 feet from it, it turns around and locks eyes with me as I pass by. This was no person. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen in my life. It was a deer, or I tell myself it was. I've seen deer stand on their hind legs to fight, but they still have deer posture when they do so. Not only that, but I was watching this thing walk for about 30 seconds from first seeing it in the distance to passing it. The posture it had was human, standard biped stance, arms back, chin down. But the worst part were the eyes, or lack thereof, as in place were two large black pits, almost black hole-ish. I'll never forget the stare down it gave me. The instant I passed it, I had the only panic attack I've ever had in my life. I had to wake up my girlfriend to keep me calm enough to get to an exit, with a large gas station a few miles away. Like hell I was going to use an off-ramp, that close to that thing. After we pulled into the gas station, I had a complete meltdown and cried harder than I ever thought I could. I couldn't talk, breathe, or do anything but want to curl into a ball and cry. After around 30 minutes or so, she finally gets me to calm down enough to tell her what happened. While I don't think she believed what I think I saw, she knew that I was convinced and legitimately scared to death. Every once in a blue moon I'll dream about it and wake up crying or in a cold sweat, and she will tease me about it or roll over and ignore me instead of comforting me about the one thing that I've ever been terrified of. But I know what I saw, and it will haunt me for the rest of my life. This is an experience I had when I stayed with my family in a guest house way out in the mountains. My daughter was quite young when this happened. I think she was about 4. My husband and I had thought that we had put her down for the night and she was asleep, but we were wrong. We were in the living room area of the guest house, and I guess that was just after midnight, when our daughter came rushing out of her bedroom over to us. "What's wrong? Do you need the bathroom?" I asked. She shook her head. I remember she looked a little shaken up. It was a rare look for a girl her age. She then said, "No, Mummy. The lady outside said, 'Can you let me in? But I can't reach the lock on the window. Can you do it for me?'" I sat there staring at her, completely unable to understand what she had just said. We were, literally, in the middle of nowhere. We drove miles and miles to get to this log cabin, and there wasn't another residence anywhere nearby. I didn't know how to approach this topic with my daughter. I didn't want to call her a liar for having a bad dream, so before my husband could open his mouth, I simply asked, "Who said that to you, darling?" As soon as the words left my mouth, concern inside me began to flower and bloom. My question to my daughter boomed repeatedly in my head. "Who said that to you?" My daughter seemed to sense my distress, and I will be honest with you, I don't think I hid my concern very well. I must have looked racked with emotion. "The lady with the hurt head outside the window, she was banging and banging on the glass, Mama." I shot a glance over to my husband and we jumped to our feet and marched straight into the room that my daughter was sleeping in. I went to turn the light on, but my husband stopped me. He said if there was someone out there, then we would be able to see them outside if the light was off. I saw something against the window, I know I did. There was this white shadow, like a mist or smoke. It looked like the rough outline of a person, and then it was gone. It dissipated. My husband asked us to wait inside with the door locked while he went out to check the situation. My daughter then said, "The lady was sad, Mama. She looked so hurt, and it looked like she had horns too." I was frightened, very frightened at the idea that there might be someone out there trying to persuade my child to let them in, and equally frightened that I might have just encountered something supernatural. My husband returned from checking outside. He didn't see anyone out there or footprints either. I mean, there is gravel around the whole building. Surely we would have heard them run off, right? But we didn't. I went by the door while he was standing there and held my daughter's hand tightly as I approached. The door was open and my husband went to close it, but I stopped him. I wanted one good look out there. All I could see was a dark sea of trees. The tree line was about 20 feet from the cabin, and all I could think was that the tree line could be hiding something. The bugs chirped and the wind blew, and it was at that point I shut the door. If someone needed help, like my daughter said, surely they would come back when the door was wide open. We all slept in the same bed that night, and thankfully nothing else suspicious happened after that. I will say that I was completely on edge until we left that cabin. It was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I wonder who the hurt-horned lady was, and why she wanted my daughter to let her in. I'm about to share with you the single most terrifying moment of my life. I have a cousin that lives in a secluded area where everyone owns land. He has something like 600 acres of land where he lets his cattle roam free. And I went to visit him one summer, and he came up with the idea of camping out. He has a little spot where there is a teepee in a clearing underneath a few large trees. The walking path goes straight through the clearing down a little trail to a pond that then goes back to some trees. To get to this place, we drove his truck through his pasture and up to a tree line. We had to get out and walk a ways into the trees to get there. Thinking back on it, I can't really remember how far into the tree line his camping site was, but it was a little bit of a walk. So my cousin, his girlfriend, and a friend she brought and myself start to drink and had a small campfire going. Someone threw a little too much brush on the fire and it got pretty big, to the point that it lit some of the branches of the trees above on fire. At that moment it was kind of scary, thinking that we had almost started a huge fire, but it grew and died pretty quickly. Now later on in the night we were all drinking, and I'm tending to the fire. The girlfriend says out loud that she needs to use the restroom, and I thought that she went down to the path near the pond. The fire is starting to die down, and I need to gather some more brush, so I start walking towards the path to the pond. As I'm walking down the path, I see a shadow of someone holding a tree branch up, seemingly looking back at me. Remembering that the girlfriend has announced she needs to use the restroom, I assume it's her, so I call out her name. As soon as I do, the shadow drops the branch and I can no longer see it. At that same moment, I hear my girlfriend shout back at me from the campsite. I look back, and from a distance I could see her coming out of the teepee. I look back at the brush and see nothing. I stare for a moment, but there was no movement. Completely shocked and confused, I start to walk back to the camp, heart already racing so fast I thought I may pass out. When I walk up to the camp, I see that all of us are there. I tell him what just happened and everyone is a little spooked. My cousin brushes it off, saying that we were out on his land and there's no way anyone could be here. We eventually kept drinking, but I can't forget about it. Much later on, I'm getting a little tired, and my cousin is just looking to fool around with his girlfriend, so we all lay down in the teepee. I'm laying next to the friend, just trying to pass out, while I can hear them fooling around. They are all talking and whispering when I hear the running thud of footsteps outside of the tent, as if something is running at the tent, then kind of hear a pop and drag, like someone hit the tent and drug against it. My cousin leaps out yelling, and now we're all terrified. He's shouting that we need to get out of there now, and we all left everything and ran to his truck. We drove back to his house scared crapless, talking about what just happened and what we saw earlier. As we were all talking about it, we all agreed that the thud sounded like it had 2 feet, and you could hear a difference in deers or horses galloping. They were big thuds, as if carrying a lot of weight. My cousin said he was laying near the edge of the teepee when he heard the steps and looked up to see something hit and drag something across the fabric right in front of him. The fact that he was actually scared is what made it even more frightening, as he had lived on that land his whole life and had been to that campsite so many times. I'm 20 years old, and I hail from a small village in the north of Iran, situated in a mountainous area surrounded by a large forest. This incident occurred 2 years ago when I was 18. It was a partially cloudy day, and I decided to take my usual daily walk in the forest. The main path of the forest runs behind our house, so it wasn't a long walk, but rather a journey deep into the forest. A dirt road with trees stretching as far as the eye could see. Despite it being later than my usual walks at around 5:30 or 6, with darkness descending I wasn't concerned. My familiarity with the path reassured me, and I assumed I would return soon, which motivated me to continue. About 20 minutes into the walk, the darkness intensified with each passing minute. I reached a section of the path, a straight road spanning about 1,000 feet, where the end was somewhat visible. As I walked slowly on that road, I spotted a dark figure at the far end, a dark entity standing in the middle. It was dusk, so I wasn't sure what I was looking at, especially from a distance. My first thought was that it was probably a cow. It's a village, so many people have farms around here, and sometimes they let their cows out in the woods for days, but usually in groups. So when I wondered why this one was alone, and more importantly, why it wasn't moving. Believe it or not, I don't know why, but I didn't stop. It might have been curiosity, or perhaps I didn't want to appear easily frightened in case it was a prank by someone from the village. I can't really pinpoint what I was thinking at that moment. I just remember looking at the thing without blinking. As I walked towards it, what creeped me out the most was the fact that this thing didn't move an inch. I became increasingly uneasy as I approached it, and a shape began to emerge. It had a tall figure with long, skinny legs. At one point I thought I saw a third leg or perhaps a stick in its hand. I can't say for sure. As I continued, my heart felt like it was about to leap out my mouth. I stopped 60 feet from it, observing it standing perfectly still without moving. I lacked the courage to say anything, and at that moment decided to forget it, and turned around and walked away. As I retraced my steps, I constantly glanced over my shoulder, paranoid about seeing the thing move. However, each time I looked back, it remained motionless, gradually getting further away until it was finally out of sight. It was nearly pitch dark at this point, and after a few turns I managed to calm down. I didn't worry as much, and resisted the urge to sprint home frantically, and continued walking at a normal pace, attempting to push aside thoughts of what had just happened. I started using my cell phone, considered calling a friend, and to talk to someone until I got home. But just before making the call, I looked back one last time, something I wish I had never done. I saw something that still scares me to this day. There it was again, the dark, blurry figure standing still in the middle of the road, about 50 feet away from me. This time I didn't stay to see if I would see it move. I ran for my life, and I ran as if stopping meant certain death. I didn't look back once, I just sprinted. When I arrived, my hands and feet were trembling, an experience I'd never had before and hope to never have again. My family, upon hearing my account, insisted I must have been hallucinating, but I can sense the shock and fear in their eyes. I've never seen such a thing again, and never discussed it with anyone until today. Nevertheless, the experience will forever linger in my mind, haunting me. Just so you know, Deb is a creature known among the people of Mazandaran, which is a province in northern Iran, who lives in the woods, runs very fast, is sometimes invisible, tall, and has a huge dark body. The narrations are different about how it actually looks. It is believed that someone goes out in the woods alone at night or dawn, and Deb will attack them. Once they wake up, they'll feel confused, crazy, or perhaps lose the ability to speak. In some stories, they were able to run away with a sharp weapon or even by praying. It's also believed that some got very rich after stealing its hat, which brought them lots of wealth and good fortune, and everyone in their family and the next generations was safe from any harm from this creature. But if it really was that, I'll never know. What do you all think? One of my friends knew about this disused cabin in the woods. It was built on the edge of a river on a kind of sandbank. There was a decline in the popularity of hiking and outdoor activity in the area due to a tragedy, and it was practically deserted. So me and 4 other friends seized the opportunity. We planned to go and hike in that area and thought that we could use it if no one else was. When night fell, it was truly pitch dark out there. You couldn't even see your surroundings. It was a great night to be out in the wild. I loved the natural ambience, and there was the constant trickle of river mixed in with the trill of insects. We heard what we thought was the sound of fingers drumming on the window pane. There was a nearby willow tree, so we assumed it must be the sound of a branch being dragged by the wind against the window. The lights were off early that night. We were all tired from the hike, and most of us were asleep in our own spot inside the cabin. It creaked now and then. There was a noise of people rolling over in their sleep, and of course with 5 men in there was definitely some snoring. But other than those noises, it was a quiet night, and we were miles away from any city, town, or main roads. I couldn't sleep though. I was tossing and turning all night. We hiked and slept outdoors all the time, so I don't know why I couldn't sleep well. I had this unpleasant feeling in the pit of my stomach, and constantly felt like something was about to happen. I quickly found out what was causing my unease. The sound of the willow tree colliding with the window was getting louder. I listened closely and focused on the sound. It sounded to me like it was hitting different parts of the window. Then it sounded like it was coming from the other window, at opposite ends of one another. I didn't remember there being trees outside each window, and I felt my stomach tighten with that realization. There was a regularity to the sound as well. It didn't match the gust of wind anymore. It was a steady tapping sound now. It was no longer the sound of branches dragging. It sounded deliberate. The sound of those taps and knocks was circling the cabin. I sat up and tried to identify the source of the sound. I couldn't place it because the cabin wasn't at ground level. I couldn't look out the window from my sleeping bag to see. I needed to open the door. I knew that I wouldn't be able to sleep unless I checked, so I tiptoed over to not wake up the others. I was still thinking I was being paranoid at this point, and I didn't see the sense in waking up my friends with nothing confirmed. I slowly opened the cabin door with impeccably bad timing, as soon as I opened the door, I came into contact with the source of the circling tapping sound. There was a young woman with long, messy hair grinning at me. She was barefoot and wearing a nightgown covered in mud. I screamed and woke my friends up. She had been tapping on the window, and she just stood there smiling at me. I instinctively shut the door, and we had little choice but to wait until morning, as we had no cell phone reception in the cabin and couldn't call the police. We later found out that the young woman was the daughter of the owner of the land that we were on, and she had done this before. I started to think back to the tragedy that happened around here. I think it was a missing person case or something, and I wondered if she had something to do with it. I think we all had a close call that night. She apparently didn't even know how she got there. Her feet were so badly cut up that there was blood in the muddy puddles she had created by circling the cabin. I don't know how long she'd been circling us, and what might have happened if I didn't get up to check. To start off this story, I need to give you a little insight about myself. I'm an 18-year-old female who grew up in Michigan and have lived in the country for as long as I can remember. On this particular hot summer weekend, my friends and I, including my boyfriend Tony and my older brother Brad, decided we were going to go camping for the weekend, as it was such a nice warm week. Tony's parents owned a cabin way out in Ludington, surrounded by a huge wooded area with a personal lake and no neighbors for at least 4 miles. But being stupid teenagers, we really didn't think about that. All we were ready for was to party like any normal teens. And after being there for 2 hours, our fun had started. Tony's friends had bought tons of alcohol and weed for us to have at the weekend, so we wouldn't be bored as we had no service and only movies to watch. After it got around midnight, it was pitch black, and we had this huge bonfire going. It was a total of 6 people, including me and Tony, and as we talked and laughed about upcoming events in our lives, we were so distracted that we didn't notice that my brother had literally frozen his eyes into one section of the woods. Mind you, we were all quite intoxicated and high at the time. Eventually our talking ceased when Tony realized his friend and my brother had an emotionless expression. He asked Brad how he was, but Brad didn't reply or make any indication that he had heard him. After that, me and my 2 girlfriends began to get scared as well. It took a lot for my brother to act that way. Eventually, I was the first one to catch on that he was excessively staring into a certain spot in the woods, and I turned my head and followed his gaze as best I could. And when I finally caught on to what he was looking at, my heart dropped. Right there was a dog. At least that's what I thought. It was some person's dog that wandered off. But then my brain kicked in, and I realized that there weren't neighbors for many miles. It was very unlikely for there to be a dog. My mind began to race, while Tony still tried to get Brad to speak or even move. In one motion, this thing got off its 4 legs and stood up on 2. That was not something we were expecting. And when it did so, it was gigantic. It had to be at least 6 feet tall. I kid you not. The other 2 girls and the other boy with us audibly gasped as they finally grasped why my brother was as still as a stick. No one moved for what seemed like hours, but was probably mere seconds. Tony was the first to talk. "Doesn't have a tail." No one heard what he said but Brad, and I swear to you, when I say his eyes were as big as saucepans. That freaked me out immediately. "What did you say?" one of the girls asked. "It has no tail." My heart stopped beating. He was right. It didn't have a tail. Suddenly my clouded alcohol mind cleared up in a fraction of a second when I finally realized what this thing was. Now I understood why my brother was basically crapping himself. Could it be a skinwalker? My instincts kicked in right there. But before I could nope out of there, the thing let off a terrible stench like rotting meat. The sound was enough to scare the hell out of everyone. My brother, who was the first up out of his chair, and started shouting native words to the creature when I told him to just get the hell inside. No one questioned me when they saw how dead serious I was, especially Tony. He's never seen me so scared, so he knew we were in a bad situation. We all fled from the cabin, with my brother in tow, shouting native words at the creature, which seemed to keep it at bay, giving us enough time to get inside. He slammed and locked the door before turning all the lights off and grabbing a special ash from the kitchen counter and started throwing it at every window and door while chanting. Of course, he had freaked everyone out, and we were all in tears. After he was done, no one said a word for a long time. Many of us were in shock. He grabbed my dad's pistol and was holding onto it for hours. We must have all eventually fallen asleep, and we were all very shaken up. I awoke to my brother packing all our stuff into the 2 cars early in the morning. I understood why. We had native family. We knew what we were dealing with, and we knew it would come back, and maybe not alone. Before we did, I did a blessing on the cabin and spoke a few calming words to the still very freaked out girls. We left as soon as everything was packed up, and to this day we still haven't explained exactly to our friends what happened that night, and they don't bother asking us either. I heard this from a close friend of mine. He is an avid hiker and loves the outdoor life, and we often go mountain climbing and camping together. I will switch into first person and tell you about his experience as if it were my own. I had wanted to climb a very snowy mountain in my region in a party of 5. We researched the climb and figured it would take us 3 days and 2 nights to get to the summit and back down. The first day of the climb was difficult. The temperature was below freezing and the terrain was very rocky. We ended up expending a lot of our energy. It got dark at 4 p.m. that day, making progress difficult, and we pushed on through and managed to set up base camp, and we pitched our tents. We made it to a flat area which was kind of like a field, with fresh covered snow covering everything, and all we could see was black and white, and the sky was being black, and the ground snow white. It didn't take me too long to drop off to sleep, despite the fact I was shivering in my sleeping bag. I did, however, wake up in the middle of the night and heard a voice outside my tent. I was groggy, and I almost thought it was morning, but I couldn't see any light. I thought it could just have been one of the people I was hiking with. I lay there, static in the dark, trying to get back to sleep, and then I heard the voice again. Hey, hey. I was very confused at that point, because to me that voice didn't sound like it belonged to anyone in our group, and there was just another off-putting thing. The voice sounded like it was coming from the direction we had just climbed up. The voice was coming from the descent, if you know what I mean. I checked my watch and it was past 2 a.m. I wondered if someone had been injured, another hiker perhaps, so I woke up our whole party, we lit our lanterns and turned on our flashlights, and we called out in the direction we heard the voice from. "Anyone out there? Are you hurt?" We called out. but the only response we received was the howl of the wind rustling through the trees and the gentle sound of snowfall. It was as if, the moment I had called out, the voice had stopped calling. I didn't hear it again that night, but it played on my mind, and I slept very lightly, as if there was an ever-tightening knot of concern in my stomach. It was weird, but we had to move on. I supposed I must have been hearing things. You can hear all sorts of strange noises out in the wild. It could have been anything. Well, that was what I thought at the time. That's what I tried to convince myself of. However, I knew deep down it sounded way too human for me to mistake it as an animal. The following day we continued our climb and covered a lot of ground. We crossed several peaks and pitched our tents again when the sun began to descend. We were in a prime position to aim for the summit in the morning. I got myself ready for sleep, hoping to catch a few extra hours which I missed out on the night before. I ended up waking up again though. This time it was because I needed to take a whiz. I got up and headed out of the tent into the freezing cold to find a place to relieve myself. It was pitch black, but the blanket of snow at my feet allowed me to at least see where I was going. The moon was pretty full and it was just jutting out from behind the summit of a mountain. I stopped to look at it, and it was then that I noticed something. I tried my best to get a good look, but it was difficult. The snow was obscuring my view, but there was definitely something out there near the summit. It looked like there was a light flickering in the distance, maybe the light of a lantern or a fire. I decided to call out and shouted, "Hey!" The light then disappeared, as if in reaction. But then something different happened. I heard voices coming from that direction, their calls carried on the wind. "Hey, hey!" I shouted back. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need any help? Is anyone out there?" I did so because it sounded like the same voice I'd heard the night before. The voice never answered. I couldn't consider it a coincidence anymore. All I could do was head back to my tent and get back into my sleeping bag. Something was trying to call me, I know it was. It was trying to separate me from my party. The mountains are scary, but thankfully nothing much else happened. We climbed the summit and made it back down without any further issue. While I was up there, I did look for any signs of fires or lanterns, but couldn't find anything. I do wonder what was calling me though, and what might have happened if I went in search of the owner of that voice. It was early spring of 2016. I had just turned 24 years old. My friend and I just reached our main spot to camp, Black Canyon Rim Campgrounds, just outside of Payson, Arizona. We'd usually travel out here 2 or 3 times each year. It has some incredible views and is only a couple of hours away from the city. For the most part, this area was pretty secluded. A privately owned convenience store rested a few miles away, with a small town 20 miles before that. The entrance was on a dirt road directly off the highway, with a campground sign at the start of the road, marking local wildlife, any fire hazards, and general news relevant to camping folk. The path is mostly linear, with maybe one fork spanning several miles. We once traveled down the dirt road to see how far it would take us. One of the paths would take you to another highway entrance, with a ranger's tower halfway there. The other path led to a dead end. An abandoned cabin can be found on this path a few miles in, mostly hidden off in the distance behind some larger foliage. The snow had mostly cleared up at this point, leaving for crisp air, a slight chill, and fauna becoming active again. We'd usually spot some wild horses, several deer, and tons of little critters whenever we'd come out this way. It really was the perfect time of year for a relaxing trip to get away from the city for a few days. We got in at around 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. It was late for us, and we'd usually try to make it out of there by noon at latest. This trip was pretty spontaneous. We both had work during the coming weekend and decided to just go for it. The sun was setting fast, and we still hadn't picked our camping spot. There were maybe 2 other groups, both families parked somewhat close to the entrance, only a few hundred yards away from the highway. This time around, we just wanted to get away from the humans for a while. Customer service jobs will do that to you. We drove down the dirt road, past our usual spot, and finally picked the perfect area. A small clearing just hanging off the edge of a hill. The whole valley could be seen from this area, with a beautiful sunset. This would have been our main spot from then on, if the next night's incident never occurred, that is. We agreed to get a campfire going, and we would just avoid building a tent on this trip. We didn't have much time to do so anyway, and her car wasn't that uncomfortable. I'd sleep in the back seat, and she'd take the passenger seat with the window slightly ajar. We'd have a few blankets for each of us and would fall into that unrivaled slumber. The next day went fairly uneventful. We just decompressed, and I had this strange feeling throughout the day, like we were being watched. There were crunching of leaves just out of sight every few hours, but I figured it was just the local wildlife doing their thing. My friend didn't notice anything unusual, so I didn't dwell on it. Night came, and the feeling still hadn't gone away. My friend must have felt something she didn't vocalize though, as she took some of her sleeping pills. She didn't usually need to take them on our camping trips. The nature's ambience was enough to put anyone to sleep, I thought. It was nearing 1 a.m. My friend dozed off in the passenger seat while I attempted to wind down in the back. I leaned against the side window behind the passenger seat, legs outstretched to the car's back door. The window opposite of me was rolled down slightly, with a cold breeze flowing in. I had been on my phone scrolling through Facebook when I heard something outside. A few crunches of the fallen leaves, several paces outside the car. I whispered to my friend, "Did you hear that?" But she was already out. I put my phone down and listened intently for a minute or two, but then heard nothing. Must have been a small animal curious about the camp. I retreated back to my phone, scrolling through social media. About 10 minutes had passed when I heard it again, that definitive crunch right outside the door. I lowered the phone. My eyes took a moment to adjust from the light of the phone into the deep darkness of the wood, and as I turned the phone away from me, the backlight illuminated the window above my feet. To this day, I can't get the image out of my head. 2 dirty, scabbed hands held onto the window, the fingers wrapped inside the car. The nails were long, unkempt, and dark. Behind the window, a silhouette of a face was pressed up against it. The breath would create condensation every few seconds, and all I could make out were the reflections of those empty, black eyes. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. It felt like eternity. The staring contest between this thing and me. Thoughts were repeating incessantly in my head. Why haven't they ran if they noticed I saw them? What were they planning? Is this the face of death? After probably 10 seconds of not doing anything, the hands slowly unclenched the window and receded into the darkness. The condensation on the window dispersed, and another few seconds passed before I heard the dreaded crunch, crunch, melodically fading into the distance. I still just sat there. What on earth had just happened? Why didn't I do anything? Why am I still not doing anything? With that thought, my body shot into adrenaline. I pounded on my friend's seat, waking her up from her slumber in a dizzy confusion. I unlatched and kicked open the back door and took a moment to scan the area. Whoever they were, whatever it was gone. I scrambled to pick up any important camping supplies we left outside and cramped everything into the back seat and trunk. periodically looking over my shoulder and listening for those two footsteps. I slammed the back door shut, and there they were, a grim reminder of the horror that had just happened. 2 handprints imprinted on the window. I quickly wiped them off the window in a panic, a reaction to erase the events, I guess. I jumped into the front seat, started the car, and floored it out of there. My friend, finally coming to, asked me what the hell I'm doing. I just screamed, "We gotta go, there's someone out there." I didn't see whoever or whatever it was fleeing the scene, speeding down the dirt road. My friend insisted I slow down, and eventually I did. We reached the highway, and I proceeded to drive 20 or so miles before we reached a Denny's, where my friend asked for us to stop and eat to explain everything. The nightmare subsided a few months later. My embarrassment continues to this day for the state of shock I was in at the time. Everyone says you have a fight or flight instinct, and I'm confused whether I have either. I merely just sat there and did nothing. I frequently tend to ask myself who was out there. Another camper messing with us? A resident of the abandoned cabin down the dirt road? Or maybe something more paranormal residing in the forest watching lone, vulnerable campers as they drift off to dreamland. We'd still go camping there in the years ahead, but never too far from the highway. Whatever it was, I hope I've seen the last of it. I grew up in southwest Saskatchewan and moved onto my auntie's farm in 2019 to live in the other house that is on their property. The house is fairly old, but I loved it. It wasn't long after I moved in, though, that I started to feel uneasy in the house alone. I would close every window when it got dark, as if it felt like something was watching me through them every night. Eventually, I decided to get a puppy to keep myself company. When my boyfriend at the time was at work or away from the house, it was especially nice to have a companion, but I always dreaded having to take her outside when it was dark. For a bit of scene setting, our house sat on the left side of a gravel road. At the back of the house, there was about 10 meters of backyard, and then there was a cow pasture and the cow barn. We didn't own cows, but in the summer another farmer would rent our pasture space, and so we would have them on the property. It wasn't uncommon at night to hear coyotes surround the farm either, and there were tons. Every so often when I'd go out with my puppy, we'd hear them all around us, too close for comfort. We had a farm dog too, who would keep the coyotes away for the most part as she was huge, but every so often she'd wander elsewhere on the property to scout, and the coyotes would get a little too close for comfort. They always tried to lure my puppy out to them, but luckily, I kept her leashed. Now, one thing you should know about my pup is that she takes forever to find a spot to go potty. This is still a problem today, some 4 years later, and back then it was the bane of my very existence. She would pace for at least 5 minutes, and that was only after finding a suitable spot, and sometimes would go out there for damn near half an hour just so that she would go. On this particular night, it was raining heavily. I was not happy to be out there, and she had decided that she wasn't going to go until she found her perfect spot. We had already been out there 15 minutes, and at this point she was also getting frustrated with the rain and wanted to go inside. But I wanted her to go before we went in, since we'd already been out there for so long. So, as any annoyed puppy mother would do, I started getting a little frustrated, and would repeat, "Go potty, go," every time she'd get distracted from her objective. It was dark. I was cold and annoyed, and to make matters worse, the cows behind us were fussing fairly loudly. This was out of the ordinary for them. They were usually quiet and slept at this time of night. I was also hearing what sounded like a strange whistling, but shook it off as probably being an owl. I tried to keep it out of my mind as I pleaded with her to go. That's when I suddenly heard it. Go! Now, one thing you should know about me is that I have a very strong fight or flight response typically, but this brought out the third response, as I froze on the spot. I was mostly confused after what I'd heard. I tried telling myself I hadn't heard it, and tried telling myself it was just a move from a cow that I must have heard wrong. But again, as if spoken directly behind me, I heard it. Go! It sounded unnatural. It was as if it was coming from someone who had never spoken a word before, a raspy, deep, monotone go. It almost sounded like it was coming out of an old radio, but of course there were no radios out there, and every time it said it, it sounded in the exact same way as the first. And whatever it was has started repeating, as if it had been taught its new favorite word. At this point I spun around to the pasture to find nothing there, and then, the moment after I span around, from behind me I heard, "Go!" This all happened in the span of about 3 seconds, and at this point I remember shouting out loud, "Alright, you don't have to tell me twice," as I picked up my furball and made a mad dash for the front door. I swiftly locked both doors behind me and sat bewildered in my kitchen. My puppy went back to puppying immediately, obviously unbothered by it all and happy that I wasn't making her stay out in the rain any longer. I picked up my phone and called my aunt, asking her if my uncle had been out in the field with the cows, and she said she hadn't, and I explained to her what just happened to me. She sent my uncle over to the pasture to check it out, but soon after told me he hadn't seen or heard a thing, and he said he'd check the pasture again in the morning. I spent the night hiding from windows with the lights and TV on loud enough to not hear anything from outside. The next morning, when my uncle checked on the pastures, he found 2 dead calves. It explained the colossal cow panic that had ensued the night before. I regret this, but I didn't push for any more information as I honestly just didn't want to know. But they told me that other than that, they didn't find anything out of the ordinary. A few months later, I moved off the farm. I couldn't be in that house alone anymore, and my boyfriend and I had parted ways. A few months after that, I started going to therapy for paranoia as a result of this experience. I started feeling that people were watching me, out to get me. Another few months after that, I moved out of the province for good and finally felt safe. I'm wondering if anyone here has any idea what the hell this would have been. There's no chance it would have been someone in our field, as we're fairly far away from towns and neighbors and have cameras that would have seen anyone enter the property. Coyotes are common, but I don't think they're capable of mimicking words. Now, since moving, I've had some weird related things happen as well, but I'll save that for another time. For now, what do you think was shouting go? This happened to a friend of mine while he was attending some mountain climbing club. He and some friends in the club were set to meet up at the campsite before taking off on a local mountain hike. One of the members of his team was running late, so the team waited at the campsite for him to show up, but it was getting late. His friend wasn't a bad climber at all, and he was familiar with the mountain range, so naturally the team were growing a bit concerned by his lateness. They started to get concerned something had happened. It wasn't until it got very dark out that he finally showed up to the campsite. Everyone was relieved, but had a collective question on their minds. Where the hell have you been? When that question was asked, the response the missing team member gave was nothing short of unusual. I set off earlier to meet you guys here on time, but I ran into something that I really can't explain. Did you guys pass by a spot where there was a broken streetlight that was kind of flickering on and off? Did you see that? The group agreed they'd passed the broken light. Right. Well, when I got close to that light, right, I saw something. Underneath that light, there was a figure of a woman wearing rags. The team members exchanged glances of concern and even snickered. The late team member continued. Yeah, well, I mean, you wouldn't expect to see a woman out on a mountain trail that far in without any gear, you know. It caught me off guard. I didn't know what to do, so I just stopped and watched for a while from a distance. It was at that point I realised something was wrong. The woman disappeared sometimes. I know that makes no sense at all, and I don't mean that as an analogy, I literally mean that she disappeared and then reappeared every time that light flickered on and off. When the light was on, she wasn't there, and when it was off, she was. I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. I looked at her from so many angles, just to try and make sure I wasn't seeing things. I didn't like what I was seeing. I thought that, it could be a ghost or something. And there was no way in hell I was tangling in the paranormal out there in the middle of the woods, so I had no choice but to either pass her in that flickering light, or go the long way round and be late. And, well, you know the choice I made. He explained himself with a look of disappointment on his face. Everyone seemed a little concerned. I guess they weren't sure what to believe. The way my friend tells the story, it makes it sound like they dismissed what they saw, and they all just carried on with their night. Some of his friends made fun of him for using the paranormal as an excuse for being late. They berated him, saying things like, "What a lame excuse." He told me about that story 6 months ago, and I thought it seemed kind of creepy, but I didn't think much more of it than that. I thought that it was all said and done. So I was a little bit surprised when my friend mentioned it again this week. We met up to do a little bit of mountain hiking on our own. I had actually gotten interested during those 6 months that had passed. Do you remember that story I told you about my mountain climbing friend and his lame excuse with the broken light? Yeah, I replied. What about it? Is that why you were late? And he was late, by the way. No, I saw it too. I smiled and exhaled through my nose, expecting it to be the punchline of some lame joke he was trying to set up. The only thing was, his face didn't show any signs of humor. He wasn't kidding, and to be honest, he looked a bit pale. We were in the same place that his friend said he saw it, so we were going to hike the same course, so it did make sense. He said there was definitely a woman who appeared and disappeared on the mountain trail beneath a flickering streetlight. Like his friend, he was too creeped out to go anywhere near her, and he also described her appearance as shadowy and wearing dirty clothes. I have known my friend for years, and he has never once come out with anything like that. Yet I still don't know whether or not to believe him. I mean, is this just some kind of sorry I'm late excuse that mountain hikers use? Or is there really an apparition on the trail? Well, apparently 2 people have seen this woman, and I wonder if there are others out there. The truth remains unknown, I suppose. I haven't really shared this story with many people, but I thought it might be time. This happened back in the 90s. I was driving from Ohio to California and stopped finally for some sleep at a rest stop in Flagstaff, Arizona. I am known to drive long distances with little sleep, and woke up and headed to California. It was early in the morning, around 4 a.m. California time, and I was between Needles and Barstow, out in the middle of nowhere in the Mojave Desert. And that's when I saw what I swear to this day was a huge wolf the size of a person run across the road in front of me. It was on all fours, and the back of it was above the hood of my car easily, a Chevy Cavalier, and roughly 12 feet ahead of me. I hit the brakes lightly, as I was the only car around at the time, and it went from north to south. Over 20 years ago, and still, clear as day, though it was dark. Now I've seen coyotes, and lived in the desert for some time, and have never seen anything like this before or since. It was grey in colour, mostly, and resembled a werewolf in size, but I don't believe in those generally speaking. And out of all my 20+ trips, I've seen snowstorms, tornadoes, dust storms, and other things I'll never forget. But this is one of those things. Anyone out in that area ever seen anything like this? It still drives me crazy trying to figure out what the hell it was, and I do speculate often enough about it. This happened roughly 2 years ago. It was summer and early night, and the only thing that was unexpected that night was the light fall of the rain. I was proud of my car. I used to love taking it out on long drives. I didn't really care where I went as long as there was an open road ahead of me. I liked going out on weekday nights as there was less traffic that way. I loved the mountain roads on the weekdays, as they were great for drifting, and I was getting into that. I put a lot of money into my car, and it was tuned out to the max. I was with a friend, and he was driving too. Before we got anywhere near the mountains, I felt as if something was kind of off. There was a weird vibe, put it down to the unexpected rain in the summer. One of my friends had said that he wanted to go further into the woods that night. I guess I did too, since I was kind of bored of drifting around the same curves. I smiled at the beware of animal signs, thinking that we were invincible. I guess that's how it is when you're young. You just have something about you, don't you? I'd seen animals crossing the dark roads at night, so the signs weren't intimidating to me. I saw 3 animals that night, actually. Nothing that impressive or frightening. A weasel, a big bird, and a tanuki. One of my friends swore that once he saw an animal with a glowing white body one night. I just laughed it off. I'd never seen anything like that. There were no streetlights in the mountains, and there was nothing but darkness. I guess he had just witnessed an optical illusion. We kept on driving. It got later and later. I mean, we always headed out late, but it was almost 3 a.m. and we weren't heading back home. I'd had enough, to be honest, plus I was running low on gas and didn't feel like wasting it driving around and around in the middle of nowhere. I turned around and put my hazards on, and I sent a friend a message to let him know I was leaving. I sat there messing with my phone, expecting my friend to reply. He seemed to be taking his time, though. I thought to myself, screw this, I'm tired. I figured my friend would understand if I took off early, and I meant we were in constant communication with each other. I gave him to the end of my smoke. I lit it up, cracked the window a little, and the rainfall on the roof of the car was quite nice. It wasn't heavy, but it was light enough for me to stand out there and smoke a cigarette without it going out. It was at this point I heard a strange noise. There was a faint wailing sound. It was quiet, but it was definitely there. It wasn't as loud as the rain, but I could still hear it all the same. I knew that some animals could make calls that sounded almost human. I tried to convince myself that it was just an animal, but I couldn't. With each passing second, the realization sunk in. It sounded more and more like someone crying. I remember sitting there, the smell of tobacco, the drum of the rain, and the sound of the windscreen wipers going back and forth. I had the key to the ignition in my hand. I wanted to go, but something inside me told me I shouldn't. The sobbing sounded louder. There was something new now, a new sound. I paused the windscreen wipers so that I could listen a little closer, and it sounded as if there was a child wailing. The crying I heard before was undoubtedly the cry of a woman, and now there appeared to be a baby in the mix. The road was slippery, but I felt as if I should pull away. I really, really hated the sound of that sobbing woman. But I knew deep down in my heart there wouldn't be a woman and child out there in the middle of nowhere late at night. I just knew it. So I say this with a clean conscience. I got the hell out of there. It wasn't until about a month later I heard a woman and her son had been taken and their life ended there by her husband, the boy's father. What a dark thing to do. Apparently their bodies had only just been discovered. It had been out there in the heat of the summer and the cold of the rain and wind for some time. I don't know if it was their residual voices that I heard that night, but all I care about is if their souls are at peace. I spent my life in Georgia and love hiking all over, but I must admit, North Carolina has the best mountains. For this reason, I frequently drive up there and hike and camp. This time, I went up with my family in an RV and stayed with them in Maggie Valley. The next day, however, I had them drop me off about 10 miles away at the cold mountain trailhead, and I planned to hike up, spend the night, and be back down in the morning. I was by no means inexperienced at hiking or camping, but I have never camped alone. On top of that, I didn't bring a pistol, something I won't go without now. On the way up, the trail was surprisingly strenuous, not necessarily steep. I've hiked some steep stuff out west, but more like tons of up and downs, and feeling like it would never end. Eventually it began to get darker, and I realized we needed to stop and set up while I still had light. So I stopped about half a mile short to the summit and figured I would continue in the morning. Nothing eventful happened. I set up camp in a really good spot, ate my food, and went into the tent. At this point, I realized I hadn't run into a single other person my entire way up. This wasn't eerie at the time, but soon would be. I have trouble sleeping and usually lay awake for up to an hour trying to sleep. During this, I thought I heard someone lightly walking around the general area because of the rhythm of the steps. I brushed it off as my mind running wild, but I did pull my big old knife out of my bag and put it next to me in the sleeping bag. That morning, I woke up and ate oatmeal. As I ate, I looked over at my tent and noticed a strange bundle of dried twigs and berries tied with a green cord propped against my tent. Internally, I was pissing myself, but I packed my stuff up and took off within 5 minutes. There was no way I was going to be bothered to go up to the summit now and headed straight down. On my way down, I realized there was a pretty heavy fog and ended up on a side trail that eventually ended, and I was lost. I used a compass to eventually reorient myself and found the trail again, one of the biggest reliefs I had, and made it out with no incident. However, I come to find out that same morning, a 27-year-old died on the same section of trail as me, and it's possible I would have run into him had I not gotten lost and rejoined the trail later. His family seems to have scrubbed the internet of several of the articles on him, but the scariest part was knowing that someone knew where I was and watched me, and I had no clue about them. This is a story that was told to me by one of my firearms instructors called Chris. In northern Idaho, deep in the Rocky Mountains, there's a cabin that runs a cattle ranch. Chris's brother knows the owner and invited Chris to spend the weekend up there for some hunting and hiking. The brothers gathered their supplies, and a few of their best pals took off to the mountains. As they were driving up the winding Idaho roads, his brother issued a cryptic warning. There are times the cattle escape into the woods and require being tracked down. The owner of the ranch has seen strange creatures in the forest. I'm not messing around. Everyone laughed and didn't take the warning seriously. Within the hour they arrived at the cabin, and on the second day in the mountains, Chris decided to go on an afternoon hunt with one of his friends. They drove down a back road into the forest until the road ended a few miles from the cabin. They got out and walked to the nearby creek, then split off with one person going upstream and one going downstream. After walking for a ways, Chris came to a silty deposit where he noticed a foul odor and a broken pine tree that was green and healthy. The trunk was snapped in the direction of the water. There were 4 finger indentations on the tree bark line, like it had been squeezed and pulled out by a massive hand. Sap bubbled from the compressed bark, and on the ground he discovered numerous huge footprints with 5 toes stamped into the silt. He followed them and counted 73 beautiful tracks that led to another snapped green pine tree. The tree also had big finger marks on it and was facing in the direction of the water. Tracks danced all around this tree. The smell was now overwhelming. Chris became so spooked that he immediately ran back to the truck. His friend had shot a deer, and they quickly drove back to the cabin with it. At the cabin, Chris explained the situation to everyone, and that night, 6 men from the cabin armed themselves, each with a rifle and a pistol, and returned by truck to the end of the dirt road. They parked the truck facing the creek and then walked on foot to the edge of the water. It was a moonless, starry night, but the horrible smell lingered. The band of hunters waited and at one point howled into the night, calling for the creature. Chris thought he could hear something moving in the forest, but the creak was too loud to be sure. He decided to walk alone upstream and into the woods to get a clearer sound. He could hear that there was definitely something big making its way through the pines. He ran back to the hunters and warned them that something was approaching. Moments later, from both up and downstream, they began to hear branches snapping and footsteps thudding. The sounds came from both directions, closing in on the group. The footsteps grew louder and louder until the booming crunch of a log under the surface of the mud spooked them so much they all ran back to the truck. In less than 2 minutes, they made it back to the vehicle. The moment they fired up the truck and turned on the headlights, they could see 2 massive bipedal hairy creatures moving up the creek in the location they had just retreated from. The creatures' eyes shone from the headlights. All the men had clear shots, but all took flight back to the cabin in terror. The stench greeted them upon their return. They feared that with the slain deer outside, the creatures would be drawn to the property, and they all slept curled up with their guns that night, but no more signs of the creatures would be found. "I told you, little brother, I wasn't messing around." He figured he ran into a family of them. There was a wild look in his eyes as he turned to me and said, "I know they exist." This happened 30 years ago, but I remember it clear as yesterday. I went on a camping trip with 4 friends. We brought our tents, camping stoves, and other necessities for the trip. As we approached the camping area, we saw an abundance of people. Some were fishing, barbecuing, and playing games. One of the guys in the car said they didn't want to camp near a bunch of people. I agreed. I wanted peace and quiet on the trip, so we continued deeper into the woods to search for a more secluded and suitable spot. There was a wooden bridge up ahead, and we felt like it was a good place to park the car. We got out with our rucksacks and walked alongside the river upstream. Now we were in the middle of the forest, a very secluded area, and it was just what we were looking for. After walking for about 10 minutes, we finally found a decent spot to set up our tents. We set them up, pour our beers, drink, and eat watermelon in the lake, and then just chill, and went for a swim. We brought along a radio in the hopes of listening to some tunes, but couldn't get anything more than static crackle. I guess it was because we were very close to the mountains. It was quite cold that night. Even though I was lying on a blanket, the ground still felt cold. The second night was just as cold. Some of my friends went back to the campsite area to purchase blankets. When we were finally warm enough at night, the nights were pretty fun. We were all having a great time, but it was the next night that something strange happened. I managed to get a radio signal, and I was listening in my tent alone, but then it suddenly cut out. Almost instantly, I heard what I thought was a woman's voice. I listened closely and knew it wasn't the call of a deer or the croak of a frog. After a short while, I was able to discern what the voice was saying. "Don't camp near the river. Don't camp near the river." It sounded as if it was coming from downstream and approaching our camping area. The voice grew hoarse and raspy. It mumbled and seemed like a chant at some point. I really didn't like it. It was creepy. I could do little more than grab my blanket and hide underneath it. The voice sounded like it was coming from right in front of my tent, and I expected to see a figure lit by the moonlight pass by, but I saw nothing. I only heard that voice telling me not to camp there. I don't know what happened after that, but I must have fallen asleep or passed out, because when I woke up, the sun had risen. One of my friends came over to me as soon as I unzipped the tent and told me that they wanted to leave. They said they didn't want to camp by the river anymore because of something strange they heard last night. It seemed as if they had heard what I had too. Our other 2 friends were asleep and claimed that they didn't hear the voice but didn't argue. They said something about sensing bad vibes that night as well. I wonder if someone really came all the way into the woods just to tell us that one night, one friend said. It was odd, because if they did want us to leave, then they could have told us in the daytime. Something didn't add up, and we all agreed it was probably best to go. One said, "Look around, you guys, there's no one else here. We're literally in the middle of nowhere. We had to drive a good 20 minutes from the nearest camping spot and walk 10 more. I seriously doubt anyone was passing through. You hear stories of ghosts in the woods, and by the mountains, who knows?" Could it have been someone hiking their way through the mountains in the dead of night? It didn't seem logical, but not impossible. I've told members of my family about this strange experience, and I was shocked at my auntie's response when I told her about the river I camped next to. Oh my gosh, that's such a dangerous place to camp. A young woman was swept away in a flash flood, and her body was found miles downstream. I've been skeptical about this incident for years, but whenever I think back to that night, my spine freezes up. What do you guys make of it? This happened back when I was living in Needville, Texas. I left my mum's house to go feed our dogs that were living at my grandma's house. She had space for them, so they stayed there, and we lived a few miles down the street. This was a little after the 2008 crash, and we had lost our home back in South Carolina like most people had. So we had moved to a smaller rental property in the middle of pretty much nowhere. Needville is a tiny farm town with maybe 300 people at most. Anyway, it was a hot, muggy summer evening, and I headed over to go see my grandma and chit-chat for a bit. I fed the dogs and hung out with my grandma for a few hours. It got dark out, and I decided that I should head back home. So I got back in my car and drove back home. When I started pulling up on my mum's house though, I see a large, squatting shape in the driveway, like a gorilla. I start to enter the driveway slowly, and as soon as my tires hit the gravel, it immediately whips around to face me. And right there, lit up in my headlights, is this hulking creature, about the same size and build as a gorilla but covered in thick, silver fur. And it had huge, bulbous, ruby-red chitinous eyes, and a gruesome snarling mouth full of sharp teeth that looked like they were a good 2 to 3 inches long. It had a small forehead and a round head that was about the same size as a human head, covered in the same thick silver fur. In the moment that it heard my tires hit the gravel, it turned, snarled, and bared its teeth at my car for a brief second, then immediately turned towards the bushes on the other side of the yard and kicked off with its feet, exactly like a gorilla. It looped off into the bushes, alternatively swinging on its hands and landing on its feet, and then vanished. I pulled into my mum's driveway and just waited in the car for a minute to let that thing hopefully run off before I bolted into the house. As soon as the light on the front porch came on and my sister poked her head out to see why I wasn't inside yet, I launched my happy ass right out of the car and full-on sprinted to the door. I didn't see that creature ever again after that, but that didn't stop me from being vigilant for a few months after. This happened when 4 friends and I were camping one night. A typhoon was approaching Japan. The weather forecast had stated that it wasn't on course for our campsite, but it had changed direction, so we were forced to check into a guest house. It wasn't raining, but our tents wouldn't be able to withstand the strong typhoon winds. We approached a guest house, and the building was magnificent, and we were welcomed by the cheerful owners. It was great. They guided us to our room, which was opposite the hotel's banquet hall. "We don't often use this room, but it might be a little noisy tonight," the owner said in a hushed voice. "I'm sorry. I hope it doesn't ruin your stay with us." My friend and I went into our room and settled down. We ate and drank some of the food and alcohol we packed for our trip, and we could hear some noise from next door. The party in the banquet hall never got as loud as we were led to believe it might, and I decided to have a look around the guest house since it was a really nice place. I walked past the banquet hall and noticed something. The lights were off. I could tell by looking under the door. I could hear voices murmuring there. I went back to our room and told my friends about what I'd heard. They followed me and stood outside the banquet hall and listened. They could hear it too. Ha! Maybe there are ghosts in there, one of my friends said. We weren't scared, but the more we drank, the more curious we became. Later, one of my friends knocked on the wall of the banquet hall and asked, "Did someone die here?" And then, a huge bang answered on the door. We assumed this indicated yes. "Should we light an incense stick for you?" one of my friends asked out loud. And another bang was heard. "How many should we light? How many of you are there?" It was silent for a moment. Then we heard multiple bangs. We froze in fear. I can't remember anything after that. I guess I could blame it on the alcohol. But I woke up in bed. I got up and ran out of the room and into the hallway. The owner's wife was walking towards me in this beautiful kimono. She had a huge bundle of incense sticks in her hand. She paused and smiled, and then said to me, "You heard it then?" I nodded. She told me that a long time ago there was a terrible typhoon which claimed many victims in the village. They had to use the banquet hall as a makeshift morgue until help arrived, and that now and then they make contact with the guests, and that they must have liked us. I've been backpacking and camping, mostly solo as an adult, for the majority of my life. I'm cautious about my surroundings, and I listen carefully when I'm out. I try to remain an observer and move through the land with little impact. I'm also very interested in the mysterious and the obscure, cryptids and the unexplained, reading all of the 411 cases as well. A few years ago, I set out to camp near an old-growth forest in North Georgia. Most old growth here is gone, but there are places that haven't been logged yet, and if you get the chance to visit one wherever you may live, I'd suggest it. It's beautiful, serene, and alive in a way that's hard to describe. This particular forest was one of hemlock and poplar, and the trees were massive. I had a guidebook that gave directions out into the sticks, following little country roads that eventually turned into gravel. After a long drive into a national forest, I parked near the trail, which was unmaintained, meaning it wasn't very popular or highly traveled. I hiked out through the woods to where the trail eventually just kind of stopped. There was very little undergrowth, and I spent the afternoon just exploring, looking at the trees and enjoying the calm. I eventually made my way down to a creek and crossed over it to an old field that formed a sort of bowl in the land with hills and ridges on all sides. The fact that there was a field means that there had, I guess at some point, been people living in the area, but I saw nothing of the sort when I was there, and my map showed that I should be far from any roads or settlements. I set up my tent and made some food. It was late when I decided to have a little smoke and lay out in the field in front of my tent and look at the stars before bed. There was little to no light pollution, and I always relished the opportunity to enjoy the sky at times like those. As I was laying there, I began hearing a loud knocking sound from up near the ridge where I'd been earlier in the day, maybe 1,000 yards away. 3 knocks, and a long pause followed by 3 more, and then it would repeat. When I say knocks, what I mean is very loud noises, like 2 logs or trees being hit together, loud enough to reverberate in the little bowl I was in, loud enough that you could almost feel it. I could pinpoint where the sound was coming from, but it was night in the forest, and anyone who's been out there knows that it's dark. I thought that it had to be a person making that sound, because what else could make such a rhythmic sound? It was extremely loud and would have taken considerable effort to produce. I'd seen no one else at all during the day, and the direction from which the sound came was the section of old growth I'd explored earlier. And that's it. Eventually the sound stopped, and I went to bed feeling like I heard something I wasn't meant to hear. Or maybe I'd heard something specifically meant for me, and me alone. I packed up and hiked out the next day. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't hyper-aware and waiting for something else to happen, but it never did. I've told friends about this, and they'll either say it was for sure a Sasquatch, or that I was for sure close to someone's house that I didn't know about. Why would a person be out in the woods late at night, banging logs together in the dark? It was around December 2004 near Burlington, Connecticut. My friend and I were driving around ghost hunting, aka checking out cemeteries and the Green Lady Cemetery at night, because we were edgy goth kids, and it was a full moon, so why not? We got turned around on some of those back roads, and ended up in this weird woody area. It was winter with a little bit of snow on the ground, maybe a few inches. So we were driving down this really crappy paved road with lots of potholes in our old-ass Honda going relatively slow. All of a sudden, a deer crosses the road in front of us. My friend who was driving brakes, and we were only going about 25 to 30 miles an hour. The deer, no joke, stared past our headlights and right at us, and this deer was huge. I don't know how the heck you measure a deer, but I know horses and would say he had to be about 15 hands at his withers. His antlers were pretty average, nothing too pointy or dramatic, but he almost glowed in our headlights. It might have been the moon at that point, but it was seriously creepy. He stared at us for a solid minute before my friend turned off the headlights, and the deer walked straight at our car, which caused both of us to panic, turn the headlights on and actually drive around it, which was still approaching. We drive away, now going faster than 30, potholes and suspension be damned. I happen to look out the window, and the deer is pacing us in the woods alongside. It kept turning its head looking at us. We accelerate. We must have been going at least 40 at this point. We panic, but because of the road conditions we can't go much faster without crashing or messing up the car. Finally, about a mile or so down the road we come upon a brightly lit patch of road with a school and decent enough intersection that required a stoplight. I see the deer peel off behind our car and run back down the middle of the road. Anyone have any theories on what this could have been? A crazy deer? A cryptid? Or something else? I went hiking in the mountains when I was a student. I'm much older now, but this experience has stayed with me. It was autumn, and I had just joined a hiking society in college. I was a fresher and joined by about 10 other university students from different universities. I happened to go to an all-women's university, and the club I joined was all male. They had all traversed the mountains many times in the past. Some of them had tons of experience that I did not. I thought it would be a great opportunity to make some friends and learn from these guys. I felt as if I could rely on them in a sense. We all picked a great day to begin our hike. The weather was perfect. The place wasn't too bad either. I expected to get left in their dust, but I was keeping up with them quite well. I was tired, sure, but I kept my pace up. We hiked for a few hours, and we got to the mountain. We planned to make our campsite and climb the mountain before the sun went down. We took a super short breather, and then next, we had lunch. It was quite nice because we all pitched in, and before long our hungry bellies were full. I think everyone was happy with the pace of things and the distraction of food, so we kind of wandered off task, and I guess we were behind schedule. When we resumed after lunch, we all got ready to climb the mountain, so we split up into two groups. I was in the second group, and I wasn't upset about that. I didn't want to be leading the climb. We planned on reaching the summit by 3 p.m. We were supposed to have a break at the summit for half hour, But pretty much as soon as we started climbing, a thick layer of fog began to descend, so we quit taking a break due to the low visibility brought on by the fog. The visibility got worse and worse, and before long the sun was completely hidden behind clouds of mist. It was making every step back to the base increasingly difficult, and after about an hour and a half, at about 5 p.m, it was impossible to walk without the aid of a flashlight. The problem for us was, though experienced as we were, they didn't pack any flashlights, and neither did I. When we got to the summit, they still insisted on leaving early, but to be completely honest, I was exhausted. Like I said, I wasn't as experienced as these hikers, and I really did need that breather. I told them I would be following right behind them, but I only started heading back down the mountain about 5 to 10 minutes after they left. I shouldn't have done that, because even in that short amount of time, I managed to get separated from my group. I took my break and set off, assuming that I would catch them up, but it was so dark and I couldn't hear anyone's voices. I headed down the mountain in the general direction that I came from, and I guessed that I was making some progress on the descent. That's when I saw something. There was a light shining off in the distance. The first thought that came to my mind was someone in distress. Maybe someone had gone hiking alone in the dark autumn evening and had gotten lost or stuck. I mean, it was easily done. It had just happened to me. So I called, but no response came. Maybe they couldn't hear me. I started to move towards that light. I wanted to find out if someone was hurt or not. I also wondered if it was someone from the group that had come to help me. I really hoped for the latter. As I got closer, I guessed that the light had been strategically set up for me to follow by someone from my group, and I breathed a sigh of relief as I started walking towards the light. Someone's voice shouted out to me. I guess it was one of the hikers. "Don't go!" I stopped in my tracks. "It's that light. It's kind of weird," the guy said. I looked closer at the light and thought that something was wrong. It was sort of hovering and swinging from left to right, and then it moved up and down. I knew it didn't sound all that strange, but I have to tell you that by the way it moved, there was no human operating it. It wasn't a handheld torch, and it was going up way too high for it to be handheld in the first place. I ignored the light and kept going down the mountain in the direction I heard the voice come from. Before long, I got to the bottom, and then I reached the campsite. I took a quick look back towards the mountain and saw the light had already disappeared. I didn't know what that was, but I felt like it was trying to lead me off the path I was on. Had I followed it, I might not be here today. It was the strangest thing. This story happened to me and my friends. To set the scene, we were on a Boy Scout camping/shooting trip. There were between 20 to 30 of us, and we were in a little cabin thing with windows on the front and back, and a front and back door. There were wooden tables all around the area. The adult cabin, with the bathroom, was about 1/8 of a mile down a gravel road in the dark. There was obviously a buddy system because it's Boy Scouts. So it's around midnight, and everyone had been telling scary stories like normal camping trips. Well, I had to go to the bathroom and ask my friend to come along. He obliged, and we got our knives as we knew there were bears in the woods and it made us feel safer. We went to the bathroom, did our business, and began walking back. This is where it got scary. I felt an instinctual fear. I looked to my friend, and he has the same look as me. We begin to walk a little faster and unfold our pocket knives. I then turn around and see it. It looked similar to a cat but was 6 feet tall and on its hind legs, kinda hunched over. I freaked the heck out and started running. My friend sees it too, and we sprint back to the cabin. It began making a moaning/howling noise, and it was somewhere between the two, and followed us slowly. We pound on the door and the guys let us in. We tell them what we saw and they actually believe us, so we locked the front door, but when we went to do it to the back, It had no lock. We pushed a table up against it and had a kid there with his knife for safety. We drew the blinds on all the windows that had them, one of them didn't, and sat there with all the lights on. That's when we see eyes outside the window without blinds. We're all crapping ourselves, and the thing slowly walked back to the back door. We heard it bump against it. Perhaps it was trying to open it, but left when it failed. That night, we thought we were going to die, and no one slept. When the adults came to wake us, we told them, and they laughed and said that we were making it up. But we knew it happened, even though they didn't believe us. This happened over a year ago. I remember that I left my family home just before lunchtime to head off to my part-time job. I always walked to work. I was saving for a car at the time, but the walk wasn't exactly a long one. It was a pretty dull one though. I grew up in a pretty rural place, and there were fields and fields as far as the eye could see. The houses in my area were all spaced out and sparse too, which meant there wasn't a whole lot of passing traffic. It was perpetually quiet. There wasn't ever much to look at on my commute by foot. Like I say, fields, a few houses, and there was a small cemetery along the way. On the day that this took place, there were no people on the streets and no passing cars. It was a really quiet day, and I didn't at all feel that with it either. Something was off. It was like I was constantly being absent-minded. I think I was a little overtired because the shift I had had the night before was pretty hard, as far as part-time work goes anyway. I was lazily marching my way to work, not thinking about anything in particular, and that's when I noticed something. Someone was behind me. Well, I felt as if there was someone directly behind me. I don't know when this person began to tell me because I hadn't been paying attention. I will have to explain a little about my commute at this stage for the next part of my experience to make sense. The road that I walked along to work was in a straight line. That straight line runs through the middle of all those open fields I spoke to you about, and most importantly, my journey along the straight line pretty much begins the moment I set foot outside my door. So there were no houses, buildings, winding roads, hidden lanes, alleys, or anything for someone to emerge from to join me on my walk without me noticing it. What I mean to say is everything was visible. If there was someone in the field or a mile away, I would have seen them coming in pretty much any direction. So how I ended up with someone tailing me without me realizing was something highly unusual to begin with. While I continued walking, I wondered how long this person had been following me for. When I thought about it a bit more, I realized the guy behind us was now closing the gap between us. Whoever was behind was now speeding up. Before I even looked behind me, I thought it might be a male. His footsteps were getting faster, so I decided to try and attempt a sly look over my shoulder to see who I was dealing with. However, when I looked back behind me, I noticed there was no one there. That's crazy. I stopped and turned around so that I could look back, and the strangest thing happened. I felt as if someone was staring at me, but there was also no one in sight. I knew something was looking at me. I could sense it. Some innate part of me knew that I wasn't alone. Something was there with me. I just couldn't perceive it. I immediately thought that I needed to get out of there and fast. I turned to leave, but my body resisted. I don't know if it was due to the shock, surprise, or fear, but I couldn't move a muscle. My back then felt cold. The chills I felt weren't limited to my back though. It was like an ill wind was flowing through me. I don't expect anyone to understand what I'm about to say next, but this is the best way I can describe it. It was like my internal organs were cold. It was like hands were rummaging around my insides and wrapping cold fingers around my beating heart. I felt that I needed to get out of there and fast. Something was seriously wrong. I thought that if I didn't figure out how I could get out of there, something bad would happen. But in the end, I couldn't move. It was like an unseen person was holding me in place. I could almost feel arms around my neck. It felt disgusting. Then, without warning, I was released. I sprinted as fast as I could from the scene. It took place while periodically looking behind me as I ran. I headed to my part-time job, and all the while the weird sensation I felt around my neck did not subside. My neck was feeling very uncomfortable. I tried not to think about it. I tried to chant this sutra healing chant in my head while I walked. When I got home, I had some medicine, but the pain didn't subside, and after I had some of my lunch, I ended up throwing up in the bathroom. I finished work, and by the evening, when my day of work was done, I still didn't feel any better. I had no appetite, so I went to bed without eating, and didn't sleep well either. After an hour or two of light sleep, I woke up and vomited again. I was really concerned about my health for a while there, but after about a week I managed to return to normal. I was really relieved. I was worried about myself. I didn't know what I could do. I have walked along that road many times since that day, but never encountered that same thing again. I have thought about it a little more, and maybe what I experienced was some kind of spirit passing through. It definitely feels like the whole thing was paranormal. I mean, I'm no expert, and if anyone knows what that thing might have been, and if I should be worried, or should have done something else, then I'm all ears. My friend and I were hiking in Blue Ridge, Georgia. We were just going camping for one day, and the trail was part of the Appalachian Trail, near the very start of it. My friend told me a story about one of his friends, and said that he heard voices and footsteps at night near Blood Mountain, and he had to night hike because the noises were so intense. So back to the main story. We found a campsite and set up shop. As it got darker, we got a bad feeling, like something was watching us. Then it started. We saw a pair of red glowing eyes about 100 to 150 feet away from our fire. Then my friend goes to dunk his head into the creek near our tent and claims something pushed him into the water. His shirt was soaked and he hit his nose on a rock and was bleeding. Then, after that, we heard a woman's voice but couldn't make out her words. It was from in front of us, behind us, and to the left of us over the creek. It could have been a night hiker, but to the left there was no trail, and the night hikers weren't using a flashlight if they were. We also heard footsteps around us and sticks snapping. We finally just got into the tent and tried to sleep. My friend fell asleep before me, and I heard twigs snapping right next to my head outside the tent. And that's pretty much it. It's very creepy. If you decide to go camping in Blue Ridge, just know there are things out there lurking at night. The areas my grandparents lived in was somewhat known for Bigfoot sightings, and my grandfather had seen some signs of it, like a set of footprints in the snow that strode uninterrupted over a 4-foot fence, calls from the forest, etc., as they lived at the edge of a state park in Ohio. Now I've seen plenty at this point, but back then I had never experienced anything with the paranormal, at least as far as I knew. Bigfoot fascinated me. Because of all the cryptids, it seemed the most plausible, and I'd spent some of my week there watching documentaries and discussing it with him. Now, he wasn't much of a prankster, but it had happened enough that when something actually did happen, I always assumed it was him. On this particular night, I'd just gotten into bed at the end of their trailer. I was there for maybe 20 minutes in my insomnia when I heard this call from outside the window, passing by quickly down the hill. Imagine an orangutan noise, not a loud one, just that idle huffing call they do at each other. Picture that down a ways and then having coming from the lungs that should belong to a moose or bear. As I said at first, I tried to rationalize it, that it was my grandpa messing with me. He almost had to do it. This thought lasted until I remembered that the way the trailer sits on the hill, the bottom of these big windows are sitting 6 feet off the ground, and the noise had definitely come from above my head, near the top of the window. So whatever made the noise was 2 or 3 feet higher, and the old guy didn't own any stilts. I'd wish I'd gone to look, but the realization that something that massive had decided to make a noise right next to me struck me with a paralyzing fear. I was playing around an abandoned area within sight of the trailer later that same week, jumping around rotten beams and poking through whatever was left when I just stopped. There was just a massive, imminent pressure behind me all of a sudden. No noise alerted me. I hadn't seen anything move, it was just pressure. The same pressure thinking back on it. Nothing inherently threatening in it, just the sheer weight of the gaze is what got me running. Since then I have experienced a number of strange things, but nothing has had the weight of that power and felt more real and present than I think people can be. If anyone else has had anything similar happen to them, I'd love to hear about it. Many years ago, I had an encounter with a Wendigo. I'm part Cherokee, and had heard about these monsters before. It was late at night. I was a teenager, and I lived with my family. We had a few dogs, and they needed to go outside before bed. One of the dogs would only go in our backyard. One of my family members opened the back door, and at that moment the dog became instantly aggressive. This is a dog that had never shown aggression before or after this night. Just as fast as she became aggressive, she became scared and ran back inside. I had just kicked my boots off after wearing them all day and was about to get changed out of my jeans when this happened. I quickly put my boots back on and grabbed a flashlight and a large club that I had recently made. I booked it out to the back of our house and just stopped dead in my tracks. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything, but something was there. I could feel a dark presence, if that makes sense. Then I see a shadow. It's huge and moving, easily 8 feet tall, vaguely humanoid, but had these massive antlers. Normally my flashlight is able to illuminate everything pretty well, but tonight I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. It was like the light was going into a void. My eyes adjusted to the low light, and I stand there for what seemed like an eternity as I watch the figure search a workbench before it stops. The figure looks straight forward before turning to face me, to reveal glowing red eyes. The figure and I stare at each other for what must have been just a moment, but felt like eons. I know that showing fear in the situation was only going to get me killed, but for some reason I lifted the club and pointed it at the figure. The figure curiously looked at the club and back into my eyes, before slowly nodding its head up and down. I see my flashlight turn off in my peripheral vision. I look at it, and it turns back on, this time illuminating the entirety of the property. I quickly turn my focus back to the figure, but it was gone. What was lifetimes to me was no more than a minute in reality, and I wonder what it all means, if anything. I had just moved to the US for law school. Anne had made a few friends who were also from Spain like I was. Charlotte, Anne, and Lisa. We were having a really good time in the US, and in September of 2023, we decided that we would do a bit of exploration, and opted to go on a road trip to Canada, drive around Lake Ontario, and drive back to New York City through upstate New York. I am a guy, and everything went super smoothly until our last night there. For our last night, we had rented an off-grid cabin in a remote area in the woods in upstate New York. To give some locals an idea, we were about a half hour away from Harrisburg. Lisa and I had decided to spend one night in this cabin to be at one with nature. It was super old, made from logwood, and there was no running water nor electricity. Both Lisa and I had experience with survival in the wild in Europe. I myself had been a Boy Scout for my whole life, and was even a scout leader for a while. Our other two friends were, as much as I loved them, purebred city girls. They had pretty much zero experience with camping, or to just be in a place where there was no phone signal, as was the case with this cabin. We had been driving all day to get there, and when we reached the beginning of the forest, it was already past 10 p.m, and it was really dark that night. While driving to this place, we lost connection with the GPS, and I had to drive to the cabin on intuition, paired with a good old-fashioned map, hoping for the best while trying to drive safely on these muddy trails. On the way there, Anne and Charlotte were in the back of the car, and the moment they lost their phone service, they were very uneasy for the rest of the ride. All of a sudden, in the pitch-black darkness of the forest, we all saw a campfire. But there were no houses around or people, just a campfire, well organized since the fire was not spreading and it was not as big as a bonfire. It kind of startled us as we were quite remote. It was also getting quite late. When this happened, we reached the end of the trail and figured we had taken the wrong trail at a crossroad before. So I turned around and we were on our way again. Half-hour later, and a couple of wrong trails later too, we finally arrived to our destination, as we could finally see the first glimpse of this god-forsaken cabin in the middle of nowhere. To give you an idea of how old it was, the toilet was made from wood, and this was outside the cabin. When we arrived, it was still raining, and both Anne and Lisa were definitely not in the mood for getting out of the car and going into a cabin with zero light. So Lisa and I left the lights of the car on and went inside the cabin while using our phone flashlights to check the cabin out and see if we could find any old flashlights, which we did, and to see if we could turn on the fireplace, which we couldn't, as all the wood was still wet from the rain, and it seemed no one had prepared any dry wood anywhere. So with a couple of old flashlights and a small improvised fire that I managed to make in the stove, we all got in the cabin, and I started to make some pasta for us. Meanwhile, the girls were preparing the beds and closing the windows since it was already cold. The cabin had a small ladder which led to an elevated room/space with a bed where all three of the girls would fit, and I would sleep downstairs in a bunk bed that was probably here since before the First World War. While making pasta, Anna came up to me, knowing that both Lisa and Charlotte did not like to hear anything scary at night, and told me that she had seen an old cemetery in the middle of the forest on the way to our cabin, and that she had also seen a figure walking around there. I first laughed it off as nothing. I do not consider myself a big believer in scary stuff. Being from Spain, we take promises very seriously, and to swear to God is a very serious oath for us. And she swore to God that she wasn't lying. I told her then that I believed her, but there was no need to panic, as I would lock all the doors when we went to sleep. We had some pasta, some s'mores, and each had a beer. Then I decided to have one or two more. The girls were getting kind of tired, so they went up to bed, and I, with my last beer, decided to just sit outside and watch the rain, as I do deeply enjoy listening to it. So I sat myself down with my beer, and the lovely sight of not seeing a single light in the distance. I could greatly appreciate this coming from New York City, and I just scanned the area around with my flashlight. There was nothing much really to see beside a lot of trees and a small creek a little further away. All I could hear was the wind, the rain, and the running water down the creek. That was until I suddenly heard what I would describe as a weird roar. The first thing that came to my mind was a bear, but I had researched well before our trip and knew that bears were very uncommon in this part of the state. I also knew that a bear roar would not sound like this, except for the fact that it was quite deep. I was startled, but not very scared. I continued to scan the rest of the forest as far as I could see from the porch. It was then, at that moment, that I caught a glimpse of a figure. It was hidden deep within the tree line. I was looking at it. It was at least 6'4", and it was hidden well with brown fur, blended in with the trees in autumn. And I saw two eyes glinting from the reflection of my flashlight. I wasn't entirely sure what it was at this distance, but it was not a bear. It was bipedal and had rather long arms. We looked at each other for probably no more than 5 seconds, but it felt like an eternity when it vanished behind a tree, and I heard another roar. It was then that I got goosebumps and all the hair stood up on my body. I was very scared. That was the catalyst for me to go inside as quickly as I could, lock all the doors, and close every curtain. I quickly went to bed and told myself that surely it was just my exhausted mind, and after an hour or so I calmed down and finally fell asleep. The rest of the night was uneventful, and the next morning when I went to relieve myself after having drunk beer the night before, the weather cleared and it was rather sunny, and as far as I could see the forest was calm and beautiful, with no sight of any animal or anything abnormal. We had a nice breakfast that morning and left for our way back to the city that never sleeps. And so ends the story of that night. I never talked about what I saw that night because I know all 3 girls would not want to hear it, and I figured after these months that it was best to share it here. If anyone has any idea what it could have been, feel free to enlighten me, especially if it's backed up with rational reasoning. There's the legend of the Michigan Dogman. I grew up in Dogman country. My uncle and his friends both experienced hunters, and my uncle's special ops for the military. His friend, a sheriff's deputy, came back up to the house blubbering like babies about a creature in the woods. My uncle's friend took off, and over 30 years later, still won't even look at anyone in my family's direction, let alone speak to us. Whatever they saw scared him badly. My uncle finally got it out to my granny and grandpa that they saw something resembling a Bigfoot that had the head of a dog or wolf. They unloaded both rifles and pistols on the things and hit multiple times, and the creature just ran off. We have 5,000 acres of land, so it's hard to search every inch. But my grandpa saw the fear in his son's eyes and told my granny to stay in the house and to not let me or the dogs out. He grabbed a few ranch hands and told them to rifle up and saddle up. They were going out in groups to search every inch of the land for this thing. They came back well after dark, cold, tired, and hungry. I was about 5 at the time, and this is all I remember. They found tracks, but not the thing. My uncle spent the rest of his life tracking it. He actually died on the same property, in the area where he saw the thing in 2010. He never talked about his experience much, but when he did, you could see the fear on his face. This is a man that spent 23 years as a special forces officer for the military. He wasn't scared of much, but whatever that thing was terrified him. Many believe it's a skinwalker. Some believe it's a kind of Bigfoot. Others believe it's completely bunk, and some don't know what to think. I wouldn't be so quick to mark this story off, as I know whatever he saw scared the life out of him. I'm a real outdoorsy kind of guy. I love mountain climbing, hiking, fishing, going on long walks and camping out in the elements. I always go alone. I find it a much more immersive experience when it's just me and nature. Sometimes it can get pretty creepy though. I've had encounters with animals, and I've heard some weird noises out there in the darkness of night. Nothing weirder than what I heard when I went mountain hiking last summer though. After a long day of hiking, I set up my tent to get some sleep for the night. I had left it kind of late because I was pushing myself to cover as much ground as possible. It was twilight time by the time I got myself to my sleeping bag and almost dark out. I got to sleep pretty quickly, but later that night I was woken up by some strange noises. It sounded to me like water splashing, kind of like a stone being dropped into a deep puddle. I knew roughly where the nearest water source was. It was a river, and it was pretty far away from where I was camping. I lay there in my tent thinking, what? I'm pretty sure I wasn't anywhere near it. I was half asleep in a dreamlike state. I was just on the edge of slipping back into sleep when I heard a different sound. This time it was more of a dry rustling sound. This one sounded like something was wading knee-high through thick grass. This sound alerted me. All of a sudden I didn't feel that alone. I listened intently, and after a couple of moments I figured out that the dry rustling noise sounded as if it was circling my tent. I was really freaking out at that point. I mean, I had a knife, but it was in my bag at the foot of my sleeping bag. I was too scared to make a grab for it. I didn't want whoever was out there to know I was awake, because at least then I would have the element of surprise on my side. I tensed up and tried to keep my heavy breathing to a minimum, all the while desperately trying to think of what to do next. Then, just as quickly as it began, it was over. The rustling through the grass headed off back the way it came from. Then the first noise I heard came back. That dripping, watery sound, and then there was nothing. No more sounds except for the distant cry of crickets and other nocturnal animals. I wasn't able to get back to sleep that night. I couldn't stop thinking of those sounds, the water one in particular. My mind was torturing me with possibilities of what was out there. Could it be a bear? Some random person? Here in the middle of nowhere? Were they taking note of my position to potentially return later? It could have been anything. Once it was light out, my confidence returned. I got up and looked around. I wanted to find the logical explanation for what I had heard. That's when I noticed something odd. It was a little structure a ways away from me, from where I pitched my tent. It looked very old. It turned out to be a well. It was strange, though. What was the use of having a well this far out in the mountains? Perhaps there was a village or a house in the area in days gone by. I thought that to myself, but that thought was replaced by another unpleasant thought. The noise I had heard last night. It all made sense now. It sounded like something climbed up out of the water, circled my tent, and returned to the well. I went over to the well and gingerly looked inside. There was nothing but a reddish-brown color at the bottom of the empty well. Clearly it had run dry a very long time ago. I have no idea about what I heard that night. It's the strangest thing that's ever happened to me. I couldn't help but wonder if I heard some strange hark back to some years gone by. Perhaps something happened in the area, and I simply don't know what it was. I realize how unbelievable this story might be, but I assure you it's entirely true. I've had countless experiences with the supernatural since I was 4, and I'm 33 now. But this is one of the most terrifying ones I've ever had. I had an experience with what I believe to be a wendigo this fall in early October in northern Minnesota in a state forest, very close to, if not on, a reservation. I've always heard that speaking to them can draw them to you, but I hadn't thought of or listened to any wendigo stories any time close to my encounter. I was staying with some very dear friends, Mary and Carol, and they have a camper in their yard by the lake for guests to sleep in. I had walked down to the camper from the house with my miniature dachshund, Ebony, around midnight, and found that I needed to set some things up, primarily the heater. By the time I was done getting everything in order, it was about 1:30 a.m. I never thought to lock the door because really I figured I'm in the middle of the woods, so there was nothing to worry about. But I was wrong. I had to close the curtains, and I was having trouble falling asleep because my anxiety was going mad. Mary and Carol's dogs were barking outside, and their geese wouldn't stop honking. Ebony, who usually sleeps under the covers, was sitting on my hip while I laid on my side, and I could feel her turning her head back and forth like she was trying to track something outside. I tried tucking her under the blankets to calm her down, but she kept returning to her perch on my hip. I have no idea how long I laid there, perhaps 40 minutes, when all of a sudden I heard Mary's voice outside the camper. "Anyone in there?" And then I heard a sound that sounded like claws dragged down the side of the camper. I almost called back when I realized that number one, she and Carol were both asleep by now, and two, Mary knew I was there. She wouldn't ask if anybody was there. That's when I noticed everything had gone absolutely silent outside. The dogs and the birds had stopped carrying on. The gusts of wind had even stopped. It was the kind of silence you hear about in horror stories, how the woods go mute when something evil is in the area. Then another thought hit me. Ebony would be losing her mind and barking at the door if it had been anything human. She was frozen on my hip, dead quiet and shaking. I dare not move, but I was really starting to have to pee, and I remembered that I hadn't locked the door. I have no idea how long I laid there, debating whether if I should get up to use the restroom and lock the door, but it felt like an eternity. In reality, I guessed it was maybe 10 to 15 minutes. I thought it may have been a skinwalker at first, but remembered they don't mimic the voices of your loved ones to lure you out into the woods. Wendigos, however, do. I knew these creatures, demons, whatever they are, can lure humans out of their abodes, and if they make contact with you, and everything was screaming in me to make sure I didn't look outside. I made doubly sure I didn't look through any cracks in the curtains as I walked softly to the front of the camper and very slowly turned the lock, praying and holding my breath. I made sure to keep my eyes away from the windows as I crawled back in bed and pulled Ebony close as she finally stayed under the blankets. I snuck a peek at my phone for the first time before I laid down. Figured it had to be close to 3 a.m. It was 2:30. As soon as I laid down, the wind kicked back up, and Mary and Carol's basset hounds erupted into howls, and they came running down to the camper, and a little way away into the trees, the geese started their noise again. I heard the bassets come down to the camper, barking a few more times before they laid down outside the door, as if to protect me. I didn't get out of bed that night. I told Mary and Carol what happened the next morning. I think I was hoping Mary would say she had come down to check on me and Ebony, but she confirmed what I already knew. They had gone to bed as soon as I had left the house. I said a prayer over their house, the camper, and all of us the following night, and had an uneventful night, thank God. I also spoke to another guy who's familiar with the supernatural to see if he knew any more about Wendigos. I'm not sure how accurate the information he gave me was, or if it's reliable at all, but when I asked him why Ebony hadn't made a peep, I had assumed it was because she was absolutely petrified. He said Wendigos can control the animals to keep them from alerting their owners of its presence. He also told me that they can't enter the house that aren't made of wood directly from the forest they're hunting in, tents and campers included, because they consist of man-made materials. A lock is useless. They can unlock and open a door so they can try and lure you out, and they typically stay in the woods, but they will come into a smaller town and never into a city. I had never heard any of the things he told me before, so again I can't speak for the accuracy, but I also haven't researched their claims either. He also advised me to never go outside to pee at night. If I ever go camping, bring a bucket or something, and to make sure I always close the tent flaps and curtains before falling asleep. He said if the flaps are open and you can see outside, it might make eye contact with you, and thus draw you out. After leaving Mary and Carol to go to my father's house for a few days, I had the distinct feeling of being watched when I took Ebony outside after dark. My father lives 3 hours away from Mary and Carol, but his house is in the country. I told myself it was only the fear of the experience and what I know about the Wendigo triggering an overactive imagination. I never heard anything, and I watched Ebony's behavior very closely, and she didn't act like she had in the camper. I'm moving back from that area from Canada, and this experience has been weighing heavily on my mind. I have been trying to find any information about warding them off, or if they have a home hunting range like cougars do, or if they can move on from a region. My prayers did work the second night, so I figure I can just pray over the property. I also have holy water that I can use, and as it's an evil creature that possesses people or physically manifests, I would hope it would work. Frustratingly, a majority of what comes up in searches is utter garbage. Does anyone know if they stay in one area? Are my concerns about it coming back when I get moved into my cabin warranted? Or am I worrying excessively? Does anyone have any tips for warding them off? It would be greatly appreciated. This happened when I was in university when I was driving home from a trip. The roads were very dark and I was in the countryside. The mountains and trees were blotting out the moonlight, and all of a sudden my engine began to splutter and slow until it eventually came to a stop. I'm not the best with cars, so rather than waste my time guessing, I figured I'd call roadside rescue, as it was included within my insurance. There was nothing much I could do except wait for someone to arrive. It was creepy out there. The forests are home to strange noises at night, and after a little while a bright light lit up the road, and it was aimed at my car. I thought that roadside rescue was early, and I couldn't believe my luck. But when the light got a little closer, I realized it wasn't them at all. It was strange. It didn't look like the lights of a normal headlight. It stopped about 50 meters in front of my car and then didn't move. I was getting a bit weirded out now. Unlike standard headlights, which are divided into 2 light sources, whatever was in front of me only had one. That light was so bright it didn't seem safe at all. It seemed not to have the same purpose as a light bulb. I didn't like it, and then I saw 3 people approaching from behind the light. These people were very thin and tall, at least 6'6". As they moved behind the light in front of it, I could see the lines in their faces. They were very gaunt and long. There was something off-putting about the 3 people that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Then I realized what it was. It was their style of clothes and hair. They looked like they were from another time. It was like they had been wearing the same clothes since the 70s. They approached my car and one of them spoke to me. Once again, I noticed something slightly off-putting about the people. When they spoke, it had all the wrong intonations. He was emphasizing the wrong syllables, and I'm not sure how to explain it exactly, but it wasn't right. It made listening to him difficult, yet I detected no accent to indicate they're a foreign. "Where did you come from?" he asked. I chose to remain silent before answering that I didn't want to let these strangers know about my car's engine trouble, because if I did, I wouldn't be able to get away with them. "You have a trouble with your car and I can fix it," he said. It scared me that he knew that. I said thanks, but no thanks. I'd already called roadside rescue. The man was persistent and I kept refusing. I didn't really want to speak to these guys out here in the woods alone. Then, the strangest thing happened. My thoughts felt like they were changing, like I had to mentally wrestle with myself to not allow them to work on my car. It felt like my mind was being changed for me. I started to wonder if maybe they could help. Maybe it would be a good idea to unlock the door and let them in. I got out of my car, half of my mind screaming and the other half imploring me to get back into the car and lock the doors. I couldn't fight it. It felt like I should go with these men, go where they wanted me to go. I started following them towards the light. Like a moth to the flame, I was transfixed. I didn't need to think for myself. I tried to raise my arm, but I couldn't because I wasn't in control of it any longer. I wanted to be scared, but this calm voice inside my head reassured me that there was nothing to fear. That part of me was still screaming at me to do anything to get away from these men, but my internal voices were getting quieter and quieter. While I was walking towards that bright light, my phone started to ring. It must have been the roadside rescue people because it snapped me back to reality and I was in control again. I was able to answer the phone. I was back. I knew that I needed the phone to be on. Something about that call saved me. I must have explained my location in about 10 different ways to the rescue people, as I really wanted to be accurate and I didn't want to be out here anymore. While I was on the phone, the men were trying to get me to take up their offer for help. I hated the way they towered over me, and their faces were so pale and thin like barn owls, but I refused. I ran back to my car with the phone clamped to the side of my head, and that was when they began to get angry. They were screaming and shouting by the side of my door. I began to doubt myself. Usually I would never refuse a kind favor, as I would be willing to do the same for someone in my situation. But given what just happened, I knew I couldn't trust them. They were trying to express anger, but it was like the concept was new to them. Eventually they gave up and headed back towards the beam of light. Before leaving, they did this weird thing simultaneously in front of my car. They placed an open palm on their forehead and then slapped it, as if you're high-fiving your own head. Their fingers were long and spider-like. I didn't have a clue what the gesture was supposed to mean. The light then shot backwards at tremendous speed and was then gone. Shortly after, the roadside rescue team showed up, and the guy went to check the engine and couldn't find a single fault with it. He put my keys back in the ignition, turned it, and my engine started. What really freaked me out is that I know the engine stopped. I hated it, but I needed to get out of the woods. I headed in the direction of the light and managed to get home without further incident. However, when I woke up the next day, I had a very strange rash all over my body. I went to a dermatologist and she couldn't figure out what had caused it. After 10 days or so, it went away with the cream and ointment I got from her. I'm sure the rash was related to the bright light and those 3 men. Well, I say men. I'm not even sure they were that. 2 years after this happened, I was at a party and a woman said that she was driving in the mountains in the same area as I, with her boyfriend, and they saw something similar to what I had. She said that on 2 occasions she saw beams of light flying across the night sky. Some people sniggered, but I didn't. It felt all too real. Did we have an encounter with something that wasn't of this world? I went camping one summer with my parents, younger sister, and my friend. My friend and I were around 15 to 16 years old at the time. At the campground, my parents and sister stayed in a camper we owned, while my friend and I took a tent. We were still in the same lot. One night, it must have been close to midnight, and I was sitting in the tent with our flashlights on. The campground was completely silent, and it seemed as if everyone else around us must be asleep. When out of nowhere, my friend and I hear this kid yelling for help. It kept getting louder and louder until we could hear him running. We were trying to turn off our flashlights when we saw the shadow of this person's feet running past our tent. We turned off the lights and sat in complete silence, terrified, as it sounded like another set of feet were running behind him as well. We waited for a while, When I peeked my head out of the tent finally, we saw nothing, heard nothing more, and we couldn't believe no one else was peeking outside or looking around with us. We were terrified, but ultimately made a run for it to the camper, and they all insisted they heard nothing, which made no sense to us because the screaming for help was so loud and directly next to us. To this day, my friend and I feel crazy because we know what we heard, and yet it seems no one else heard or saw this despite my family and so many other strangers being in close proximity. This happened in around 2007, and it still leaves me perplexed and freaked out. This happened when I went to Colombia for vacation. I've always enjoyed South American countries, more than anything because my parents almost always went there to spend some short vacation time, so you could say that I followed in their footsteps. I had already rented a house where we'd stayed before, and it wasn't the best in the world, but I liked it quite well. I slept in a small room with the television pointed directly in front of my bed, just as it always should be, and behind the TV was a window that I always opened when it was very hot, and closed it when I was going to sleep at around midnight. I remember one night I was watching YouTube videos and other nonsense on the internet, just killing time waiting for my food to be ready. However, I started hearing a sound that could only compare to the sound of a didgeridoo. I immediately was thrown off, put my cell phone down and took a quick look at my room. I thought for a moment that it was just a random person who for incomprehensible reasons was playing an instrument in the street, but it only took a moment to notice a face that was shamelessly peeking out of my window. It appeared to be partially melted, something that was noticeable more by the shape of his head than by his skin. The latter was a muddy color that seemed to be worn and almost in a state of decay, with no nose and eyes that were just circular and black. The mouth seemed to have a small smile on the right side, but on the left side appeared to be broken, but perhaps unintentionally showing an extension of the mouth on that side, forming a smile up to his cheek. His mouth had nothing inside either, just a vacant maw. The sound of didgeridoo that it produced only increased all the tension and fear I had at that moment, but I stopped trying to understand what the thing was and thought about my safety. I ran as quickly as possible to the kitchen and took a knife out, and I returned. It stared at me. I was very scared, but it did not prevent me from at least preparing for any attempted intrusion into my house by that creature. His face remained static, although the sound did not stop. After maybe 4 or 5 minutes of looking at it and sweating, the creature finally moved its face, and turning to the right, it left, and the sound it made vanished. I ran towards my door and saw its shadow under it. At that moment, the lights outside the house were already on. I was almost paralyzed by the entire encounter. I've always believed in sightings of the impossible, but seeing or reading about them on the internet is very different from experiencing it. I knew that what I saw wasn't normal. The window, with all the fear running through my body, was closed by me minutes later. I couldn't sleep after that, nor could I concentrate. I was just thinking, trying to rationalize, and if he really was just a tramp who wanted to spy on me. That theory, although disturbing, was the one I preferred. But it wasn't possible, since the place behind the window has no way for someone to lean in to look on the inside, because it was 2 meters off the ground. In that part there was a crack on the ground that was left by an unfinished construction, although clearly the crack didn't reach my house, so there was no way a normal person could have reached the window. This is the first time I've shared it, and I'm interested if anyone else could help me figure out what the hell happened. I'm 50 years old now, but this happened to me when I was about 18, in the 80s. Me and a couple of my other friends owned this huge bar with 3 levels of floors, and I would always have my own DJ booth in the whole bar. Anyway, the bar would open at 9 at night during this time, and didn't end until 2 or 3 the next morning. I love nature, and down in Alabama, especially where I lived, there was a bunch and lots of woods, so I would always walk home after the party was over. It was one particular night that I'll never forget. It was like any other usual night. I was playing, the party would start at 9, end at 2, and after the security guards would start clearing the place, which would be full of people, I remember packing up and getting ready to go home. I would always get offers from my friends or even females I met at the night at the bar if I needed a ride home, since I rarely drove to the bar because, like I said, I really love to walk, especially at night, hearing the late night bugs, water flowing from the stream, and even the bobcats snarl at night. As always, I thought I would decline their offers, but would give them thanks. Tonight, I did just that, and was on my way home. I would always take this route. I still remember it to this day. It was a long street passing both sides of the woods. I can't remember what the woods are called, but for probably any ordinary person, these types of woods would scare the crap out of them even during the day. This detail is just to give you a picture of how they are. Yes, during the day they are creepy, but at night I think they're like something out of a horror film like Jason or something. But I remember walking like usual, and I knew this route extremely well, and that it would be 15 minutes from me turning onto another street, which is where the woods would end on one side and would lead me straight to my house. During my walk, I hear this rustling. I'm walking on the left side of the street, and the rustling is coming from the opposite. Now, I was no stranger to the rustling. It wasn't the ordinary sound of no snake slithering or no bobcat moving around. No. These movements were much heavier. The sound was more just like rustling, as if you were rubbing your hands across leaves or wind blowing the trees. But the thing was in the air still. As I'm walking, I'm analyzing the sound. Half of me is saying, it has to be a human presence, when the other half is on edge. As I'm walking, the sound gets closer. It's as if whatever it is approaching me. As the sound gets to a certain point, I start to turn my gaze that way, and I kid you not, whatever this thing is, had the trees moving like they were on the verge of falling over. I was kind of scared crapless at this point, and tried to pick up my pace, but as I take one more gaze back at the sound, I see it. This is what I would describe as even a fearless man's worst nightmare. I stopped in my tracks when I see it. Right now, across the street from me, were a pair of 2 red glowing eyes, and as I start to analyze more, I see the thing is standing at least 10 feet tall. That's when I noticed its legs. They were more like tentacles. I stared at it for a few seconds, and then absolutely bolted. My mind was going haywire, and I ran and I ran and I ran until I found the first house and started banging on the door. It took a few minutes before a man came to the door. Clearly I had just woken him, as it was around 3 to 4 a.m. at this point. I begged for help, and he told me to go in and sit down on the couch while I tried to explain to him that I had just witnessed a terrifying creature. He instructed me to get into his truck and that we would go and check it out. He went and grabbed his shotgun, and we drove over to the spot in the woods where I had seen the creature, which of course was now gone. He seemed somewhat interested but disbelieving in my story, and after explaining that this had been exactly where it was, us looking around and finding nothing, he drove me back. It was on the way back that he mentioned that some of his farm animals had died lately under very strange circumstances. He dropped me off to my house, which wasn't far away, and left some parting advice for me, that I should stay out of the woods at night. I obliged him and haven't been back since. There's no way I want to meet the creature that haunts my nightmares again. This event took place during the years I was still in high school. I was 18, a junior, just about ready to drop out a month before I dropped out and moved to New York City. And this took place in 2011. So 5 other friends of mine and myself were getting ready for a weekend of drinking and hanging out. This was the month of February in Arizona, so it was not really warm yet, and this took place near Castle Hot Springs, out between Morristown and Wickenburg. As we drove around the old dirt roads looking for a place to set up camp and blasting music out, we found a spot and started setting up. Before you know it, tents were up, a fire was going, and beers were cracked. The sun began to go down, and once the sun was no longer out but brightness was still in the skies, a strange feeling blanketed over all of us. I'd like to say it started as if we were listening to the radio. These ads kept playing. Well, that's normal, right? Yeah, not 10 minutes straight every single station, but the ads were things of places we'd never heard of. These places did not exist. Now, our intention, no lie, was to get sloshed. That was only off beers and nothing else. I got up to go take a whiz mimicking a commercial that I was hearing at the time when I heard what sounded like a laugh. We were the only people there. We were also on a hill, so we overlooked our area. I ran back to the fire because I started to get a gut feeling to run. My closest friend asked what was the matter and commented that it looked like I'd seen a ghost. Then the radio started acting up and laughing in a circle around us and our campsite. Now the 2 girls began freaking out because the laughter was a sinister one, increasing in volume and proximity. We started cracking open the hard liquor. We were all very nervous, and all of us were hearing the same thing, so we tried to get a grip on things. Ant whipped out his phone. It was dead. John did the same thing, as did I. All the phones somehow had lost all charge. Strangely, we rushed over to the truck, since clouds were forming above us in case it started to rain. We could wait in the car, and the truck wouldn't start either. I knew the clouds were approaching because I was the first to smell the rain. Some lights flashed. I wouldn't quite call it thunder or lightning, because it was quite like the earth was taking pictures. It was dark out. Everywhere lit up like a camera flash. That's when I saw a 7-foot-tall being that literally blended in with dead trees, rocks, and bushes. It was very tall and thin. The fear was sensed hours before I saw the creature. All the electronics, of course, were malfunctioning, and it appeared to have no face. Nothing. You could just barely make out the tall, skinny-built, very thin human-like body. It could not go through things and had to go around them. I feel like it wanted me to see it. The fear it gave off was intense, and it moved lightning fast. It was only at night this thing came out. If it could come out during the day, we probably would have seen it sooner, unless it was watching us all along. I wish I knew what it wanted. It was just like running around scaring people. Oh, and as I was taking a piss, it tried luring me down by the wash, mimicking my friend's voice. When it mimicked mine on a different piss break is when I bolted back and said screw that and stayed by the truck. I don't know what happened to this day. We all somehow blacked out. The crazy part was that I blacked out in the bed of the truck. When I woke, I was so grateful to be alive and hungover, and the ringing in my ears went away. I checked my pocket to reach for my phone, which was somehow charged again. The amount of fear this thing instilled of us, combined with the scenery, was insane. If anyone has ever seen something like this, I'd love to hear about it. My family lives at the bottom of a mountain and owns 25 acres. 5 are cleared and the rest is woodland. I have the back of an old decommissioned ambulance that we set up not far from the trailer so that I can run electricity and internet to it. Now, this is when I first started sleeping out in it, and a friend and I had done so at the time. Both of us were 16 and having a sleepover inside it. Unsure what time it was, but it was still pitch black outside, when all I heard was a deep voice, far too deep for either of us, say, "Hey, hey," a few times. The first one sounded like it was outside, but the second one sounded as if it was inside with us. I rolled over and saw the friend fast asleep, eyes fully closed. I honestly thought I was dreaming because I was half awake. Nope. I mentioned it to my friend, and he said that they had heard it too, but just in a different time of night. And when they'd looked at me, I was out cold, eyes fully closed. Would it be a crackhead uttering nonsense through the windows that have screens on them, which we had slightly opened because of the summer nights? Or perhaps a person who died in the ambulance, but whose spirit hasn't moved on yet? I'm unsure, but it certainly left me with a lingering sense of dread. This happened to myself, my little brother and a cousin when I was 14 at dusk. We wanted to go play basketball at the outside courts. It was still daylight when we first got out there, and we usually started heading home around dusk or when the court lights came on, as it was only a few blocks from our grandma's house. When the lights come on, usually the bigger kids get to the court to play, but this time we were fortunate enough to have the whole court to ourselves. We were just shooting hoops like normal, nothing out of the ordinary, and the lights came on, but we were having fun anyway. The game was 21, so two of us would stand to the side of the hoop depending on which direction the ball would go so it wouldn't roll into the street. And on one of these shots that my cousin made, the ball just missed the hoop and bounced behind it. I managed to grab it before leaving the court when I saw a strange creature. It was like a little person no bigger than 2 feet, with the face of an old man and a large nose and ragged clothes that looked like they were handmade. It was crouched down, almost like in a hiding position. And when I got too close, that's when it stood up, looked at me, and ran away. Believe me, my first thought was not to chase after it. I was scared stiff, and my cousin and little brother saw it too and ran. When it ran, it was heading for the other side of the court. I couldn't believe the speed of this thing. Despite it being so small, it made it to the other side in mere seconds, in the blink of an eye. I snapped out of it and started to run home, and as I ran past that same post, the thing ran behind, and I turned to look to see if it was still there, but it was gone. When I got home, my little brother and cousin had already told the adults what happened, and they told us that these creatures are called duendes. Apparently there are different types of them too, and that's my experience. There was this abandoned factory in my hometown. It used to be a milk factory. One of my friends went in there once and told me there were a ton of adult magazines in there, and it was really popular in my friend circle. It's like the abandoned factory was ours, you know. This all happened when I was in high school. After school one day, I went with 2 friends to see the abandoned factory myself, and to be honest, I guess we were less interested in the factory itself and more on getting our hands on those magazines. When we arrived, we found a treasure trove of materials. There were videos as well as magazines. They were all lying on the ground just outside the factory. We decided that we would look over the place. The window frames were rotten and the glass was smashed. We found a way in. It wasn't much of a gap, and it would only fit one of us at a time, but we had our way in. We wanted to look around more and see if there were other magazines. The ones we found were fine, but some which didn't have pages stuck together would have been even better. We got in and were strolling around on the ground floor. It was a really big place. One of my friends realized he needed to go home and do some errands, and my other friend said he wanted to leave with him. I didn't want to leave without checking upstairs, as I was sure I was going to find more treasure. So I went to the stairs by myself. There was broken glass and dust all over the stairs, and I could tell that no one had climbed these stairs for a while. Upstairs there were a ton of doors, and most of them didn't even open. I felt kind of bummed out. Someone must have locked them all. Then I walked a little further down the hall and found a room which was open. I pushed the door open to reveal countless dead pigeons all over the floor. It was seriously weird. In that room I noticed there was a hole in one of the walls, like a few of the bricks had been removed. I went over to have a look. I didn't really know why I didn't turn back. I guess I had gone far enough in the treasure hunt that I couldn't be stopped. My heart was beating in my chest, and I felt excited that I might be about to discover something that all the kids in my school would be envious of. I looked in the hole, and there was nothing but bones, long bones like the one of the skeleton in science class. They looked large enough to belong to a human. That was enough to frighten me and persuade me to end the treasure hunt, and I ran for it. Something deep down told me to get the hell out as quickly as possible, and I shattered all the glass on the stairs as I ran, and when I got home I was too afraid to tell my parents what had happened for fear of being in trouble for looking at the magazines. When night fell and I was laying in my bed, my brain tormented me with the possibilities, and I saw those bones every time I tried to sleep. It was very stressful. The next day at school I told my friends about what had happened, and they didn't believe me. So I went back to the factory again and showed them what I'd seen. Being accused of lying is way scarier than some old bones in the factory, and we climbed the stairs and got to the room at the end of the hall and opened the door. All the pigeons were gone, and I was shocked and immediately went back to the room where the hole was and discovered the bones were gone as well. I remember getting upset because my friends didn't believe me, but in the end I think I convinced them. This was the first strange and creepy thing that had happened to me. It was really unexplainable. Where were the bones and pigeon corpses? After this event, the abandoned factory stood there for about half a year before it was torn down. It still feels very mysterious to me, but now that I'm older and I have time to think about it, I think that someone was living there. Maybe the glass on the stairs was their way of knowing if anyone was coming or going. For all I know, whoever brought those bones there could have been in one of those locked rooms I tried, and that thought sent a shiver up my spine. I'm so glad my gut feeling told me to get out of there, and I'm glad I listened to it. This is a story of a close friends. They were camping as a family, Mom, Dad, and 2 small girls in Washington State. They hiked up into the mountains for 10 miles before setting up camp. Everything was great, until about an hour after dark when they heard footsteps coming up the trail. No lights, just walking steps. The footsteps stopped outside their tent. My friend's spouse unzipped the tent to see who it was. There was a nearly naked man with wild hair and a huge beard standing outside staring back at him. "Zipping the stats?" is the only thing he said to them when they asked him anything. My friend started freaking out. Why is a nearly naked man trying to get them to zip stats? What stats exactly? How does one zip a stat? It was too far to hike back to the car in the dark, so they zipped up the tent and basically stayed awake all night while the man sat near their fire pit. At first light, they repacked and hiked back to their car. The man followed them most of the way. They didn't see him do any drugs, and he had nowhere to keep his stash since he only had on a fancy loincloth. About halfway to the car, he vanished behind them on the trail. They hoped they could put the incident in the past and forget about it, and they almost could, until they got to their car and saw that someone had written in soap/chalk, "Zip the stats," on every window of their car. There is a trail and park and wooded area right behind my house. Very near to it there's also a playground and basketball court. And it's a neighborhood park that often has a lot of people around it even at night. I often walk from my backyard to the playground with my siblings, or whenever I feel like fishing at the little swampy lake area. It was just before 9 p.m, and I was walking from my backyard with my little sister and my boyfriend to the playground. It was getting dark, and my boyfriend was still playing basketball with my cousins who drove to the park to meet us there. So my little sister and I decided to go back home ourselves since it was a short walk. We were walking our usual route, and the backyard of other homes are very visible to us. And so is ours, but it's a little further away from the playground, and we are the only people who have a big, tall white fence, so you can't see over our yard. We walk closer, but before we could get that far, I suddenly feel the instinct to look at something. I stop walking our usual route and turn my head slightly to the right to see a tall, white figure. It's not human, nor anything I'd ever seen before. I tried hard to think of what it looked like, but that's when I realized it was coming towards my sister and I, maybe 20 feet away. Thinking I was a little crazy, I asked my sister if she could see it, and she pointed at it and said yes in fright. "I think it's running at us," I exclaim. So we ran back to the court where my cousins and boyfriend were, and we ran as fast as we could as I was very afraid. The creature was tall, white, stick-like, maybe 10 feet tall, and waving in a weird way. It was really fast, and I thought it might be a deer because I've seen one there before, but it was way too tall and strange-looking, like an object and not a human figure. We just wonder if anyone has ever seen anything similar. My parents and others don't believe it, and doubt everything we really saw, but I know we did, and would love to know if anyone has seen it too. I went camping with 6 friends last summer. We hired a small campsite in the mountains. It was a really great time actually. We set off fireworks and had a barbecue. It was perfect. There is something so serene and peaceful about sitting watching a roaring bonfire, isn't there? By midnight, everyone was pretty much tuckered out, and we decided that it might be time to hit the hay. We all settle in for the night, and I don't know if I was the first one to hear it, but I'm confident that before the night was out, we all heard it. There was a low kind of moaning or groaning sound coming from somewhere deep in the woods. If I had to put an age on it, I'd say someone middle-aged was the owner of the voice, likely a woman. At points I did wonder if it was an animal, but there was something so human-like in the quality of that voice that I was convinced it couldn't be. It was clearly human. There was a certain sadness to the voice and tonality. It was rather unnerving, to say the least. It was weird because we were pretty much in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't see any other campers in the area that we hired. I remember gathering firewood and thinking, well, we're the only ones here. There weren't any houses or cabins nearby, and I didn't know who could be out here making this weird noise in the middle of the night. The voice, the moaning and groaning, only lasted about 10 minutes before it sort of ended. In the morning, my friends and I spoke about what we had heard. We later ran into another group around the campsite and asked if they had heard the creepy wailing noise. They all said they had. These guys were older than us, and they looked like this wasn't their first camping trip. When we spoke to them, they confirmed that they were regulars to this particular campsite. We mentioned the screaming sound that we heard the night before, and they smiled at one another with a knowing glance and told us the following. From this point on, it's kind of like an urban legend. It's up to you how much faith you put into our claims, but you are, so I guess you want to know. This here used to be a site for kid camps, summer camps. Ain't that way anymore, as you can tell. The reason was for the disappearances. It happened on an all-girls school summer camping trip. They were learning about forestry and nature, and used to have an awful lot of camping trips around here. But something changed after that night. It was as if the soil went sour. The teachers were all up in arms because a student went missing. They turned desperate as the minutes turned to hours. They found her, though. They found her hanging from a tree limb. The rumor was the poor girl was relentlessly bullied. If the teachers didn't notice the students were missing a few hours, I doubt they noticed any kind of bullying. The teacher who found her apparently quit shortly after. She couldn't cope with the guilt or shock. And during the search, she was the one who was most vocal. She was the one calling out to the student. And she couldn't bear the shock of letting her student down. She took the same way out as her student, and we all came to the conclusion that the moaning and groaning isn't that of the student, but the guilt-ridden teacher, still searching for her, bound to the earth by guilt. We all trembled. I did wonder if it was all a ploy to make sure noisy young men with fireworks didn't return to their tranquil campsite sometime later, but that moaning sounded so real and was so creepy. This happened in Pennsylvania, in the Allegheny National Forest in 2009. It was when the National Rainbow Gathering was there, and I was hitchhiking the East Coast at the time, and I made my way there. I ran into a buddy I had met in Florida a few months before, and she was there with a friend, so they adopted me and I camped with them. Me and Anna decided to camp alongside the main trail to get away from all the thousands of hippies. The main trail goes from a camp, the parking lot, to the main circle in the heart of the gathering, and it's a few miles of trekking. So we were just there alone besides the main trail traffic. It was dusk, and we were having a heavy talk about spirituality and whatnot, when we decided to go down to the main circle to get some food. We were standing up and I began to stomp out the little twig fire we had, when Anna said, "Do you hear that?" I stopped and listened. It sounded like someone was walking in the forest towards us. At this same moment, some people on the main trail had stopped and were smoking cigarettes and were talking amongst themselves, oblivious to us. Me and Anna listened to those footsteps quickly moving into view, but we could see nothing. The footsteps kept going, and there was nothing there. My mind was misfiring, trying to figure out what the hell that was. We could actually see the footfalls of twigs snapping and leaves moving. Whatever it was, went right up to the people on the trail and seemed to slow its pace like it was checking them out. They were totally oblivious to this, talking to each other in a circle. Then it just came right up to me and Anna and slowed down like it was checking us out. I wasn't scared, just confused and frozen to the spot. The entire time Anna was fumbling with a keychain. She had millions of things attached to it, and finally found this little flashlight and shone it and said, "Hey." Whatever this thing was feet away from me, and it bounded up the hill very fast. If I had wanted to run after it, I couldn't have. It was really fast, and Anna and myself took off down the hill totally spooked. To me it sounded like a child speedwalking, if that makes sense. The steps were short but almost robotically fast. This really happened, and Anna would refuse to talk about it after. She was totally freaked. I had to go back up and pack up the camp. I really wish I knew what that was. This all started when I was around 12. My sister, father and stepmother at the time, and her 2 daughters, were camping. We had only been there for a day and everything was fine. Then me and my sisters decided we were going to go to the stream by ourselves. My father gave us a walkie-talkie so that we could keep in contact while we were gone. Now the place we were going to was surrounded by bush, and to get there you had to go down a little path through it. We spent a while with our shoes off and splashing in the water when Jade said she could see someone standing among the trees. We all looked and saw a figure. It was dark, but you could tell it was in the shape of a man, but you couldn't see the face. We stared at it for a few seconds before it disappeared. We forgot about it and kept playing in the water, but I felt a little uneasy. A while later we all looked back, wanting to know if he was still there, and he was. Everything was silent. I could hardly hear the rapids in the little stream. We stopped looking. After about 20 minutes we headed back to the campsite. My sister lingered behind and I was about 20 meters ahead of them, but we couldn't see each other. I heard a twig snap behind me and I turned to look, assuming they had caught up to me. Nope. I turned to see the tall, dark figure literally a foot behind me, so I started running. The whole time I could feel him close behind, and I ran as fast as I could until I was out of the open campground. He was gone. My sisters came out not long after, and I told them what happened. I asked, but none of them had seen him behind me. They were too far behind, and the path was windy, so they were around a corner from me most of the time. Throughout our camping trip, we didn't see him around as much, but occasionally would see him just standing there. Fast forward a few years and we go back, with my father's new girlfriend and her daughter Stella. I can't recall this trip as much, but I know for a fact Stella saw him too. 3 years ago I started seeing him at my house, just anywhere and everywhere really. One day I was out in the backyard, and I started to lean down to pat my cat when in my peripheral vision I saw him right behind me. I looked at my cats to block him out, and as I do, I feel a hand grab my hair and tug. I immediately spun around. I now live with my boyfriend and can't say for certain if I've seen him again, but sometimes I see shadows move behind me in the reflection of the TV, and when I look, there's nothing there. I try and chalk it up to being a trick of the light, but I did hear something recently. My boyfriend's alarm went off for work, waking me up too. He switched it off but laid in bed a bit longer. I was awake then, facing my boyfriend's back, one eye closed as it was smushed against the pillow, and suddenly, I kid you not, I hear someone whisper my name in my ear. It was so clear, and I could even feel a cold breath on me. I sat up and said to my boyfriend, "Did you say my name?" He looked confused. He was just sitting there playing on his phone. No, he hadn't. I believed it was a female voice. I'm not sure if this relates to my experience, but I'll add it here anyway, as I'm dying for an explanation. I went through a period not too long ago of going out on late night jogs. I used to go out running at night, but then I ended up for one reason or another heading out later and later. I don't know why, but I really enjoyed the feeling of being out and about while everyone else was home tucked up in bed. I felt proud of myself. I live in a rural area, so the street lights were few and far between along the way. There were a few points where it would be really dark, but I enjoyed it. I'm not sure if it gave me a rush or not, but I wasn't afraid. I should probably mention that I am a man who lives in a rather quiet and safe area. This happened when I was running through my area one night at around midnight. I had just turned off the road which leads into a country lane. I liked that route because I got to run alongside an irrigation canal. It was nice to hear the water flowing below and the croak and chirp of the wild animals that lived within it. The irrigation canal ran alongside a bunch of rice fields. It was an open field area which made me feel free to be out there at night. I was slowly jogging my usual route, and then I saw something that surprised me. I wasn't alone that night. I sensed a presence up ahead, and by that, I mean I saw two vague shapes in the darkness. These two shapes seemed to be standing right beside the irrigation canal. As I drew a couple of meters closer, I was still about 12 meters away when I realized that those shapes belonged to people. Because it was dark and there weren't many streetlights, I had a hard trouble making out the faces of the people by the canal. I knew instinctively that they were older people, maybe it was due to the way they were standing or something, and I thought they looked a bit like a couple. I thought the pair of them must have liked taking a late night walk like me. I had seen others do it, so it wasn't that uncommon. Thinking that it wasn't anything to worry about, I had no issue continuing my jog past them. I took a glancing look over to them and realized they were doing something strange. I heard them talking as I approached. I had brought my pace down because I suddenly became curious as to what they were up to. I heard the old couple say, "Oh, you're doing so well, keep on trying, come on." They seemed to be happily chatting with one another as they were looking into the canal. The odd thing was in fact that it was pitch black down there. I ran past that canal a bunch of times and never saw the water on a night as dark as this one. I didn't know what they were doing, but I knew that it was something unusual. It felt weird, so I sped up and passed them. They must have heard me coming, but it didn't put them off whatever they were doing, and I heard them calling out into the darkness of the canal after I passed too. They seemed determined with their praise to whatever they were doing. I completed my jog that night and went home, showered and went to sleep. Just before sleeping, I wondered and wondered what they were looking at in the dark down there in the canal, and before I knew it, I must have drifted off. It played on my mind the next few days, and I couldn't stop thinking about what the two old people could have been up to that late, so I went back. I decided to head on an early morning jog instead of a late one as usual. I wanted to check out the area where I saw the old people. I approached through the usual route I took and slowed down at the bend that I saw the old couple. I went to the edge of the irrigation canal and peered in purely out of curiosity. I didn't expect to see what I saw, but there were 6 dolls in the canal, and all of their limbs had been removed. Those limbs were floating in the boggy water around them. Judging by how dirty those dolls looked, I imagined that they must have been there for a long time. What were the old couple doing talking to the dolls? For what reason and why? Were they demented in some way? As you can imagine, I have a lot more questions than those you just heard me ask myself, but alas, I have no answers. I ended up changing my nightly jogging route just in case. It was a creepy experience, even though it probably doesn't sound that creepy to some. One night, me and my 2 friends were walking around in the fields of a small town in Michigan. Our destination was a junkyard tucked away behind several fields, home to rusted-out cars, semi-trailers, and farm equipment. We were cutting through the fields to avoid the trigger-happy farmers that lived around there. Just about there, we were foiled by a stream too wide to leap. It was late autumn and wet feet would be uncomfortable, so we backed into the adjacent field. From our corner of the field, there was a tree line that ran east to west, and southward the land rose into a large hill. We stood for a moment, discussing our options, when my eyes were drawn to a large white boulder, seeming to glow in the moonlight. It was around 75 yards away, and I was idly staring at it when it moved. It unfolded, standing up at 10 to 12 feet, being skeletal thin, pure white with long limbs. For the space of a second it looked at us, and then it took off. I think it was running, but it may have been gliding or flying. Honestly, I'm unsure. It crossed the field up over the hill, a distance of probably 100 yards in 2 to 3 seconds in complete silence, and was gone. Only 2 of the 3 of us saw it, and after a few minutes of incoherent gibbering, we tried to rationalize, explain, and figure out what the hell it was we saw, and decided it must be an alien. A year later, I was at a party, and the subject of aliens came up, and I say, "I've seen an alien," and they say, "Yeah, let me guess, in Saranac, right?" I confirmed, and we exchanged mutual looks of awe, and he directed me to this fellow, Eric, who grew up in said town. He tells me he's seen strange things his whole life, like lights in the sky, but no humanoid beings. Fast forward another year and a half or so, and I get a phone call from an acquaintance who was sitting at work when he noticed a girl staring at him strangely. She eventually walks up to him and says, "I feel like I need to talk to you." She proceeds to tell him that her friend's dad is the head of a vampire clan in a town near Saranac. My friend remembers my story about weird things in that area and asks if she knows anything about Saranac. She gets very defensive and eventually reveals that Saranac is a breeding ground for dragons. Yeah. To this day, I'm not certain if I saw a dragon, alien, or vampire, but I did poke around a little, and I heard from a girl that lived there as a kid, and that she had seen a random 15-foot scorch mark on the roadside in the middle of fields. Any illumination would, of course, be appreciated.